Arthur is a merciless king who governs the world with his power. In his rise to power, he annihilated his foes, reduced entire cities to ashes with nuclear fire, and carried out unspeakable atrocities, all in pursuit of domination. But one day, he finds himself reflecting on the terrible acts he's committed. A deep sense of guilt consumes him, and in the very next moment, he succumbs to a mysterious illness. As he slowly sinks into the abyss, a voice echoes through the darkness, offering him a second chance and warning him not to waste it this time. A few moments pass. Arthur opens his eyes to see two people staring down at him. The man nearby is Reynold, who happens to be Arthur's father, and the woman beside him is Alice, his mother. Though they don't actually expect their newborn to comprehend their words, they're overjoyed to welcome him into the world. Gradually, Arthur comes to the realization that these two are indeed his parents, and that he was just born only a minute ago. It's still hard for him to wrap his head around the fact that he's a baby again. Yet he can't ignore how naturally nurturing his mother and father are. For the most part, he's fairly content, though he still isn't thrilled about being trapped in a baby's body. He has a big head, he can't talk, and every few hours he soils his diaper without any control, so he's completely lost his autonomy. But then, something catches his attention that's even stranger than his current situation. He watches as his father channels energy into his fists and shatters a massive boulder into pieces. Arthur is left in awe, as this is a power completely unfamiliar to him, even after all his years ruling the world. This display is apparently a pretty impressive one, so Reynold feels proud of himself and turns toward his family, expecting some praise. However, he fails to stay aware of his surroundings, and a rock ends up falling right onto his head. Alice, having anticipated that something like this could happen, hurries over to him and begins using magic to heal the injury. At the same time, she scolds him, warning him to be more cautious the next time he decides to show off. Reynolds might have just been flexing his strength earlier, but when he's serious, those fists are nothing to mess with, because he can drop a wild boar in a single hit during hunts. Having him in the party makes everything smoother for his companions. Once the hunt wraps up, Reynolds heads home, eager for that warm welcome hug, but then he remembers he's still drenched in boar blood. A quick wash is definitely will have to come first. From what he's witnessed, Arthur picks up on two important things. First, this world is so dangerous that it's normal for people to carry weapons just to stay safe. And second, if he wants to live freely in this place, he's going to need to learn how to fight. Now that Reynold has returned, Alice says it's time to lay Arthur down for his nap. Normally, he'd be annoyed at being treated like a baby, but this is actually one part he genuinely enjoys. In his previous life, peaceful sleep was a rare luxury, since there were always people trying to assassinate him when he let his guard down. Sure, he could easily handle any attackers who came for him, but the constant threat was unbelievably stressful. As months go by, Arthur's infant body gains enough strength for him to move independently at last. His first act with this newfound freedom is to waddle over to a mirror, staring intently at his reflection. While his parents find it adorable how fascinated he seems by his own image, the truth is far different. Arthur's simply grappling with the reality that he's truly been reborn as a helpless baby. Now that Arthur can move freely, he wastes no time putting his plan into action later that day. When Alice lays him down for his nap, the moment she steps out of the room, he opens his eyes. He tosses his blanket aside, maneuvering carefully to climb down and escape the crib. Then, as his mother remains absorbed in washing dishes, he begins crawling across the floor slowly, steadily making it all the way to the far side of the room without her ever noticing. She must really be focused on those dishes. Once he reaches his destination, he opens the door to the house's library and grabs a book he needs to start learning more about this world. After going through one of the books, he discovers that this continent is called Dicathan and is divided into three kingdoms. The Darv Kingdom, a subterranean nation inhabited by dwarves. The Elenwar Kingdom, home to elves who reside deep within the forest. And the Sapin Kingdom, a human nation ruled by a king, even though no one here ever resorted to nuking cities to gain control. Arthur is still eager to learn more, so he picks up another book, and this one finally gives him the answers he's been searching for. Arthur had come to realize that the technological level in this world was underdeveloped, and the reason behind this was the existence of magic. People here are able to utilize magic by channeling the mana inside their bodies. Although not everyone is capable of using it, magic still plays a significant role in everyday life. There are two main ways individuals can harness magic. magic, augmentation, and conjuring. Augmentation requires circulating mana throughout the body, which grants the user immense strength, heightened defense, and enhanced agility. On the other hand, conjurers are able to send their mana outside their bodies to manipulate and control any phenomenon they wish. That more or less wraps up the information regarding the magic system in this world, but Arthur doesn't come across any details about the healing magic Alice had used earlier, leading him to assume that she might be a rare exception. Based on what Arthur can gather, the majority of people begin to manifest their mana once they reach puberty, and by channeling that mana through what is known as a mana core, they can learn to control it and eventually become mages. Arthur finds this easy to grasp because, in his past life, he ascended to power due to the natural Kai energy flowing within him. It worked in precisely the same manner as mana, so he concentrates all his energy, testing whether he can trigger a response, and just as expected, a mana core starts to form. This marks a major leap forward in Arthur's growth. Before he gets the chance to continue his training, his mother finally manages to find him. She's been extremely worried ever since discovering he wasn't in his bed, so she's relieved to see that he's safe and unharmed. However, as she picks him up, she realizes that there's something different about him. Arthur begins to worry that she might have sensed the mana inside him, but it turns out she simply noticed that Arthur had pooped himself once again. 2 years pass, and Alice sits writing in her journal one day. She feels incredibly thankful that Arthur is growing up strong and healthy. However, she's beginning to worry a little after all. She's never once seen Arthur smile since the day he was born. Right then, she spots Reynolds and Arthur outside, and it appears Reynolds is teaching Arthur some swordplay. Arthur looks genuinely engaged, but Alice is furious that Reynolds would allow a 2-year-old to wield something as dangerous as a stick. By now, Arthur has realized that Alice isn't someone you want to get angry, so he's going to have to be careful not to make her mad. To avoid any other dangerous activities, his mother decides to take Arthur out for the day to show him around the town. And Arthur is particularly excited about this because it will give him a chance to gather valuable information about this world. He's able to gauge the level of this nation's technology just by examining the weapons being sold to the general public. And he also comes across several materials he's never seen before. Most exciting of all, he gets to witness a mage casting fire magic right in front of him, making today's trip extremely valuable in his eyes. By the end of the day, Arthur's baby body is exhausted from all the activity, so he is struggling to stay awake, and Alice wants to put him down for a nap as soon as they get home. As limiting as this new life has been, Arthur has come to enjoy life with loving parents. In his past life, Arthur got dropped off at spawn with no starter kit, so he was forced to live his entire childhood in an orphanage and never got to experience parental love, so this is a nice change of pace for him. Arthur soon dozes off on Alice's shoulder, so she begins to carry him to his crib, and along the way, she tells him how proud she is of everything he's learned. She's noticed all the times he sneaks out of bed to read books, and she saw the excitement in his eyes when he experienced the outside world, which makes her certain that he has an adventurous spirit. She assumes he inherited that from Reynolds, and she knows that sooner or later, Arthur will want to venture out on his own to explore the world. While she would personally prefer that Arthur live a quiet and peaceful life here, she's willing to support him no matter what, as long as he's truly happy. The next day, Arthur is standing by the window and watches as his father begins practicing in the front yard. He is interested in seeing the applications of magic up close and personal again, so he eagerly watches as Reynolds begins circulating mana within his body. Eventually, rocks begin to fly up from the ground, and Reynolds makes it seem like it's the greatest thing in the world, but in reality, it is pretty pitiful. This marks the extent of Reynolds' ability when it comes to conjuring, but that's only because his true specialty lies in augmentation, making his magic far more effective when used internally within his own body. Watching his father display such power inspires Arthur to go and get some training in, but just as he's about to climb down from the table, Alice informs him that it's time for his nap. Arthur still isn't able to talk yet, so as they walk past the bookshelf, he begins to whine, but Alice tells him that it's nap time and there's no room for books at the moment. Normally, Arthur wouldn't stand a chance in a situation like this, but he's recently discovered a legendary move, the pout. He's perfected the skill of using his baby cuteness as a powerful weapon. So even though Alice still plans to put him down for his nap, she eventually gives in and lets him read his book instead. Once Arthur is by himself, he starts training with his mana core, and over the last 2 years, he's managed to become quite skilled at it. By collecting different fragments of mana throughout his body, he succeeded in forming a mana core within himself, and even though the process was extremely exhausting, it turned out to be completely worth it. Now, with just a bit more focus, he should be able to cast his very first spell. But Arthur miscalculates his mana's strength and ends up accidentally blowing the entire house up. His parents were outside when the blast occurred, and it was so intense that Reynolds' back got seriously burned, but aside from that, he and Alice are okay. However, it doesn't take long for them to realize that Arthur was still inside the house when it exploded, so they immediately rush in to see if he's still alive. An explosion of that magnitude should have made it impossible for a baby to survive. Yet, when Reynolds arrives at the library, he's stunned to discover that not only is Arthur completely unharmed, he was actually the one who caused the explosion. He's just 3 years old, so using magic shouldn't have been possible until he turned at least 12, and yet Arthur is already nearly a master when it comes to mana. He stands tall with pride and looks over at his parents, but he completely forgets that the house is collapsing around him, so when 2 roof beams come crashing down toward him, he's totally unprepared. He tries to run, but his tiny baby legs give out, making it seem like this is the end for him. Luckily, both Alice and Reynolds rush in to rescue him. Alice throws herself over him to shield him with her body, while Reynolds uses his magic to stop all the falling fragments and protect them both. Arthur is a little stunned, since it's the first time anyone has ever put their life on the line to save him, but Alice is so overwhelmed with relief that he's okay. She bursts into tears. Arthur still isn't used to having people care about him like this, so when he sees her crying, he can't help but start crying too. In his old life, he never could have done something like this because he was expected to be a merciless king. There was a time when a man attempted to assassinate Arthur. After his capture, the entire council gathered, ready to pass judgment for his crimes. Not only that, but they also intended to send the man's wife and son back to their homeland, a fate that meant certain torture and experimentation. The man pleaded with Arthur, begging him to spare his family, as they were innocent and didn't deserve to suffer for his actions. In an act of compassion, Arthur chose to execute him right then and there. That's just how things typically went for him in those days. But these days, he trains alongside his father. Reynolds suggests that Arthur should give gauntlets a try, but Arthur has spent his whole life mastering the sword. He's not about to change his primary weapon now. Seeing how adamant Arthur is about sticking with the sword, Reynolds opts to wield one himself, and just to spice things up a bit, he decides to enhance his sword using mana. But to his complete surprise, Arthur does the exact same thing and effortlessly slices through Reynolds' sword. After witnessing that, Reynolds comes to the conclusion that Arthur is far too gifted for him to train properly, so he starts considering the idea of finding a professional instructor for him and heads inside to discuss it with Alice. Alice immediately rejects the idea, saying there's no way she's sending Arthur off to some random town just for the sake of training. They had already agreed on this. Reynolds would be the one to teach Arthur how to fight, while she would handle his magical education. But Reynolds brings up the fact that during their training, Arthur actually sliced clean through his mana-infused sword, and the kid is still just a toddler. If he's already accomplishing things like this at such a young age, then just imagine what he might achieve in the years to come. That's why Reynolds believes it's crucial for him to have a skilled mentor. Alice can't argue against Arthur's extraordinary talent, but she still despises the thought of sending him off to a school in the city all by himself. Because they can't seem to agree, she and Reynolds end up bickering about it for several minutes. Arthur, tired of all the back and forth, interrupts and suggests that they could simply go with him to the city. That way, he'd still get his teacher, and his parents wouldn't have to worry about leaving him on his own. The idea hadn't even crossed their minds, but it neatly fixes everything. They both decide it's perfect and, without wasting any time, begin getting ready for the trip. The following day, a carriage shows up to take them into the city. They'll be making the trip alongside a few of their old friends, and Arthur recognizes them right away as the group that helped Alice and Reynolds rebuild the house after he accidentally destroyed it. They're all part of a party called the Twin Horns. The leader, Adam, steps forward and introduces himself to Arthur. Then Angela does the same, while also pulling pushing Arthur straight into her chest and nearly suffocating him in the process. And of course, his mother watches the whole thing unfold with a big smile on her face. Fortunately, right before Arthur loses consciousness, Durden steps in and pulls him away from Angela, introducing himself in the process. He's a lot more laid back and simply gives Arthur a high five. That's when Arthur spots a girl standing on top of the carriage. She doesn't say a word, so the others chime in and let Arthur know her name is Jasmine. And finally, the last member of the group is Helen, the archer. Now that the introductions are over, it's time for the group to set out. They all board the carts and begin their journey. During the ride, Alice turns to Arthur and asks if he's looking forward to his first major trip. Arthur replies that he is, but in his mind, he can't help but reflect on how backward this world seems. Here, they rely on horse-drawn carts to get around, while Arthur recalls from his past life where he commanded an entire fleet of flying ships at his disposal. After spending most of the day in the road, the group pauses to rest and eat, setting up a temporary camp, but the moment they stop, a pack of wolves launches a sudden attack. The beasts rush in recklessly, only to be swiftly overpowered by the skilled adventurers, who dispatch them in mere moments. Arthur finds the whole scene pretty fascinating, as it's the first time he's witnessed real combat in this world, and he's already set on becoming strong enough to deal with threats like that by himself one day. Now that they've got a bunch of dead wolf meat, the group decides to cook it up for dinner that night. Only problem is, they don't have any spices, so it's just going to be plain grilled meat. Right then, Alice notices a small injury on Reynolds' arm and offers to heal it for him. But before she can start, Jasmine quickly tells her to hold on a second. The rest of the group immediately gathers around Alice to keep watch, since healers with her abilities are extremely rare in this world. If anyone were to witness her using healing magic, she could easily become a target because of it. With Reynolds fully healed by Alice, the group resumes their previous activities. However, Adam feels like stretching his limbs before he gets some sleep. He's heard plenty about Arthur's strength and wants to witness it firsthand. This is nothing more than a friendly test of skill. Adam instructs Arthur to prepare himself, already channeling mana into his spear. Without hesitation, Arthur follows suit, doing the same with his own weapon. The moment the match starts, Arthur focuses magic into his feet. Right as he's about to collide with Adam, he suddenly disappears, only to materialize behind him. It should have been the ideal opening for Arthur to land a hit, but his short, clumsy toddler legs betray him. His feet skid on the ground, throwing him off balance, and the stumble gives Adam just enough time to regain his composure. Arthur and Adam then start sparring. Because Arthur's still just a toddler, his light body isn't able to match the strength of an experienced adventurer, and he ends up getting launched into the air. Fortunately, the others catch him before he can hit the ground, and immediately start scolding Adam for almost injuring Arthur. But Adam defends himself, saying he couldn't hold back because Arthur was way too strong. It's insane for a kid to have that kind of power. He suspects Reynolds must have put him through some kind of elite super soldier training, but the truth is, Reynolds never actually taught Arthur any of it. He figured it all out on his own. Right then, Jasmine walks up and accidentally startles Arthur. She had been really impressed by his fight, so she asks if he can show her how to do that thing he did with the magic in his feet. Arthur had hoped to keep that technique to himself, since it's something he perfected in his previous life. But Jasmine isn't accepting no as an answer, and judging by the look in her eyes, she's not about to let it go. She'll probably keep bothering him non-stop until he gives in, so at some point, he might have no choice but to teach her. The next morning, the journey continues as planned, and along the way, they take a few breaks to relax. During these breaks, Adam gives Arthur a few basic spearman lessons, and Helen teaches him how to use a bow a few minutes after that. And with a few basic lessons, he is able to figure it out pretty quickly. Arthur's expertise from his past life is limited to the sword, so these new lessons are incredibly useful to him. Impressed by how much he's gaining from them, he chooses to pass on his technique to Jasmine. The method involves infusing magic into your feet while simultaneously harnessing wind magic, resulting in a massive increase in speed. After watching him perform it just once, Jasmine manages to copy the move flawlessly. A bit later, while Arthur is reading a magic book inside the carriage, Jasmine is also there for some reason, simply staring at him, and it's definitely not by accident. She keeps using every opportunity she gets to be near Arthur. The following morning, Jasmine gives Arthur a knife to thank him for teaching her that technique, and it becomes pretty obvious that she has feelings for him, especially since she normally doesn't go out of her way to connect with people. A few minutes later, everyone gets back into the carriages and they continue through the journey. But as Arthur is reading his book, the carriage is suddenly attacked by bandits. They are being attacked by bandits and the carriage is completely surrounded, so there's nowhere for them to go. The bandit leader commands his men to seize the women and children so they can be sold into slavery. With that, all the bandits charge forward, and the adventurers do everything they can to push them back. When it comes to sheer strength, the Twinhorns and Reynold are far superior to any of the individual bandits, but the numbers are just too great for them to handle alone. Eventually, they're bound to be overrun. At a certain moment, the bandit leader hurls Reynold into the carriage, leaving him severely injured. Alice immediately wants to rush in to heal him, but Reynold warns her to keep her distance. If the bandits discover her ability, she'll become their next target. Instead, he urges Arthur to take Alice and flee as far as possible. Arthur hesitates, unwilling to abandon his father, but Reynold insists, revealing that Alice is pregnant with his brother. Keeping her safe must come first. Realizing the urgency, Arthur agrees. Once Reynold gives the signal, Arthur gathers his magic, ready to escape with Alice. Meanwhile, Reynold vows to stay behind and stall the bandits. The bandit leader orders his men to go after Arthur and Alice, but Reynold refuses to let that happen, so he charges and clashes with him. The leader managed to knock Reynold down before, but this time Reynold's family is on the line, so he's not going down easily. As Reynold keeps the bandit leader occupied, a few of the remaining bandits make a move toward Arthur and Alice, but Adam and Jasmine quickly hurl some daggers at them, taking them down and opening a path for Arthur to get away with Alice. Everyone is doing everything they can to hold the bandits back from reaching Arthur, while he focuses all his effort on getting his mother out of danger. It's honestly kind of ironic. After spending his past life taking things without caring about anyone else, now he finds himself running away just to avoid losing someone who means a lot to him. After several minutes of running, Arthur figures they've put enough distance between themselves and the bandits to be safe, but he couldn't have been more wrong. A bandit is observing them from a cliff above, and this one actually knows how to use magic. He casts a wind spell aimed directly at them. Arthur doesn't notice him right away, and by the time he finally does, the spell is already on its way, so the only thing he can manage to do is shove Alice out of the way and take the full force of the attack himself. The wind blast knocks Arthur back, so he's going to fall off the cliff, and with his toddler body, that's basically a death sentence. However, if he's going to die, he's not going out alone, so as he is falling off the cliff, he takes the knife he got from Jasmine and throws it at the bandit. The knife strikes the bandit, and the string winds tightly around his ankle. That gives Arthur the chance to yank him off the cliff as well. The adventurers quickly try to use magic to catch Arthur, but by that point, he's already fallen too far for them to reach, which means Arthur is as good as doomed. As he plummets toward what seems like certain death, Arthur reflects on his life, and even though the end is near, he feels an odd sense of calm, knowing he was able to protect the family that means so much to him. He finally gets why that man in his previous life was so determined to safeguard his loved ones. Arthur didn't even hesitate when it came to sacrificing himself for his mother, and while he doesn't regret what he did, a part of him still wishes he could have stayed with them just a little longer. After taking that deadly fall, Arthur somehow drags himself from the river and stumbles into a cave, but just then, he finds himself staring straight into the eyes of a horrifying creature. Immediately regretting his decision to seek refuge here, he attempts a sneak attack on the beast, but the monster effortlessly swats him aside mid-air and urges him to relax. The monster insists that it's not evil and that it only wants to be friends, but Arthur doesn't believe a single word. In any case, he's still seriously wounded and his injuries won't heal unless he eats something. That's when the monster begins picking fruits from the cave wall. It tells Arthur to eat them, but he doesn't trust these random fruits growing out of a wall. He gets ready to stand up and try talking his way out of the situation, but right then, his injuries finally catch up to him. As he tries to rise, he hears something snap and instantly breaks down, crying his eyes out. The monster scolds him, telling Arthur to quit his crying. After all, surviving that fall was nothing short of a miracle. Arthur's mind races with questions, but the creature cuts him off, refusing to answer unless he eats the fruits. At first, Arthur hesitates, unsure, but the moment he takes a bite of the first berry, he's surprised they're actually delicious. Once he's finished stuffing his face, Arthur turns to the monster and asks if it knows anything about how his parents are doing. The monster explains that it's unable to leave the cave, so it can't go check on Arthur's family in person, but it does possess an ability that lets it see across great distances. Using this power, it generates a screen and shows Arthur that his parents have successfully taken down the remaining bandits, so they're still alive and safe, and Arthur is overjoyed to hear such wonderful news. Grateful, he thanks the monster for confirming that his parents are unharmed. Realizing he'll be stuck here for some time, he figures he might as well get along with his strange new companion. Her name is Sylvia, and as it turns out, she's actually a kind person. Over the following days, Arthur remained in the cave, eating and resting to allow his injuries to mend. Sylvia never left his side, keeping a close watch over him the entire time. Once he had finally regained his strength, Arthur was desperate to return home immediately, but Sylvia warned him there was no way he'd survive the journey back alone. The cave he's in right now sits on the outskirts of the elven forest, and this part of the forest is crawling with all kinds of magical beasts and ruthless bandits, way more than Arthur can handle. But that doesn't mean he's going to be trapped here forever. Sylvia has the power to open a dimensional rift, which means she can send Arthur back home, or at the very least, to a place safer than this forest. The only problem is, it's going to take a long time for her to create the rift, so until then, Arthur's just going to have to wait. Since there's nothing else for him to do, Arthur grabs a stick and begins swinging it around, practicing his swordsmanship. A few more days pass, and although Arthur has come to appreciate Sylvia's company, he still hasn't learned a single thing about her. The only things he does know are that she resembles a terrifying monster, that she seems to be hiding from something, and that she's an incredibly kind person. After Arthur is done with his sword training for the day, he heads over to a rock and sits down so he can start training his mana. Sylvia is impressed that a child as young as Arthur already has a mana core, but she's sure that he never learned how to do this. She stretches out her hand, and a large quantity of mana begins pooling in her hand. Arthur is blown away because Sylvia is essentially gathering mana as she casts her spell, and if Arthur could ever learn how to do that, there's no doubt he'd become insanely powerful. That being said, before Sylvia even thinks about offering to teach him the technique, she first asks Arthur what he intends to do with the power he'll gain from mastering it. Arthur had never really considered it before, but now that he thinks about it, he recalls how his family and friends were all nearly wiped out because of some bandits. So he tells Sylvia that he will use his power to destroy anyone who dares to hurt his family. However, Sylvia doesn't like that answer, so she flicks Arthur on the forehead and knocks him back. Sylvia snaps that she'd never share her skills with someone who thinks that way. Arthur argues that wanting to destroy your enemies is only natural. He doesn't get why is she so angry. To make her point, Sylvia presses a single finger to Arthur's forehead and coldly explains, with this same touch, she could crack his skull like an egg or simply brush his skin lightly. Then she asks him, which would he rather experience? And Arthur obviously doesn't want to die, so he says he would prefer the gentle touch. It's easy to let your actions be driven by anger and hatred, but once you give in, your life will become an empty, endless cycle of hate. She doesn't want Arthur to waste his life like that, so she asks him once more, what will you do with the power? Arthur takes a moment to reconsider, but now his attention is drawn to the cheerful grins of those dear to him. With that in mind, he responds that his goal is to wield his strength to safeguard the ones he holds close. Sylvia, pleased with this response, finds it far more to her liking. Meanwhile, outside the cave, a monster that looks very similar to Sylvia seems to be tracking her down, and it is really close to finding her. Back in Arthur's old world, he was the king, but that didn't mean he held all the power. The people who were really in charge were the parliament, so Arthur was basically just an agent of war to be called upon whenever the senators needed him to commit unspeakable acts of violence. But he never liked living that way. Returning to the present moment, Sylvia guides Arthur through the steps of her technique. After demonstrating it herself, she instructs him to give it a try. Arthur starts gathering and compressing the ambient mana in the air around him. Once he masters the process, he channels that mana to enhance his own abilities. Sensing the immediate boost in his power, he excitedly rushes over to Sylvia to express his gratitude for her training. However, Sylvia suddenly senses someone approaching, so she knocks Arthur into a pile of rocks and tells him to stay quiet. Arthur has no idea what's going on, so he takes a look out of the pile of rocks and sees another monster that looks just like Sylvia. Sylvia seems to know who he is, and she is surprised that he managed to find her here. But the second monster doesn't want to waste time, so he demands that Sylvia come with him. But Sylvia simply says no, so he instantly begins attacking. Arthur wants to rush in and help her, but then he hears Sylvia's voice in his head, telling him not to worry about her. The other monster attempts to persuade Sylvia to just go along with him, warning that if she doesn't, he'll be forced to kill her. But Sylvia would rather die than obey him, so she begins gathering her mana and unveils her true form. It turns out that Sylvia is a dragon, and in this form, she's able to use much more power than before. She fires a huge blast at the other monster, so he blocks it. But he tells her she's being foolish because with the current state of her body, she won't be able to survive using that much power. Sylvia is well aware that she will probably die from this, but she doesn't mind because she has lived a long and happy life. She succeeds in slamming the other monster into a wall, but he's not finished yet. He gets back up and starts unleashing a barrage of blasts at Sylvia. She takes heavy damage from the attacks, but at the moment, she's more concerned about Arthur than herself, since the fight is now dangerously close to where she hit him. The other monster launches one more blast at her, and she can't dodge it since it would hit Arthur. So she uses the full extent of her power to intercept the blast and stop time temporarily. While time is stopped, she tells Arthur to come out of his hiding place. Arthur does as she says since it seems safe, and he would like to ask questions about everything that's going on, especially the fact that she's a dragon. But there's no time to waste. Her time-stopping ability won't hold much longer, so she has to move quickly to get Arthur to safety. She tears open the dimensional rift she had been working on, but because of her injuries and the rushed, incomplete casting, the portal doesn't lead to Arthur's home. Instead, it opens into empty, unknown space. She was trying to avoid sending him into the forest since it would be dangerous, but she has no choice now. In any case, she's confident that Arthur can survive on his own and make his way back home with the technique she taught him, so she's not worried about his safety anymore. She once again asks him what he intends to use his power for. Without a moment of hesitation, Arthur responds, saying he'll only use the power to protect his family. That's enough to reassure Sylvia that he won't use his strength for selfish purposes. Before he goes, there are a few things she wants to give him, so she creates an egg and a feather right in front of him. She tells Arthur to wrap the egg in the feather and take good care of it, and as a final parting gift, she imprints her will onto Arthur's body in the form of a mark on his arms. Arthur is confused by the fact that he asks what she's doing, but Sylvia doesn't have the strength to explain it. She tells him he will figure out how to use it one day, but sadly she won't be there to teach him anymore. She also takes a moment to apologize to Arthur, admitting that, in truth, she could have teleported him back to his family the moment he arrived, but she was enjoying his company so much that she didn't want it to end. And now, because of that selfish choice, she's ended up putting him in danger. Arthur feels terrible because he knows he doesn't have the power to save Sylvia from dying here, even though she taught him so much. He doesn't care if she's a dragon or a monster. To him, she's a precious member of his family. He tells her he thinks of her as a mother, but Sylvia reminds him that he already has a mom. Arthur tells her she can be his grandma. Sylvia didn't anticipate that response, but the idea of being called grandma really appeals to her. She asks Arthur to repeat it, and he gladly obliges. Though Sylvia feels deeply sad that she won't have the chance to see Arthur again, time is running short, so she gently pushes him forward, urging him to step through the portal. Arthur understands, so he takes the gifts she gave him and walks through. But at the last second, he changes his mind and starts begging Sylvia to come with him. But she can't do that, so she closes the portal and sends Arthur away. Time resumes and Sylvia is hit with the blast from the other monster, and the damage looks fatal. She falls to the ground, but the monster isn't fooled into thinking she's dead. It knows she's far too strong to be defeated by a single blast. Still, as he moves closer to her still body, he lowers his guard. The moment he's within reach, Sylvia gathers every last bit of her strength and unleashes unleashes a devastating blast, reducing him to ashes and obliterating everything nearby. As Arthur is getting teleported, he hears one last message from Sylvia. She asks if he recalls what she told him earlier about the proper way to use his power. Arthur does remember, though he still feels deeply saddened by everything that just happened. Sylvia then tells him that the world can be a sad place, and moments like these are bound to happen every now and then. But that's exactly why Arthur has to make a difference, why he has to turn things around. Arthur pushes back, insisting there's no way he could ever accomplish something so huge, but she isn't asking him to reshape the world overnight. He can take it slowly, one small step at a time. Besides, this isn't his first time seizing control of the world's fate. Sylvia knows about Arthur's previous life as a king. Even though she disapproves of the way he ruled in those days, she's confident that if Arthur refuses to let hatred take over his heart, he'll grow into a truly noble king, one who can truly change the world for the better. Some time passes, and Arthur regains consciousness on the ground, vowing to honor Sylvia's wish. But first, he has to figure out how to escape this endless forest. After Arthur is teleported into the elven forest, he starts his journey back home. As he walks, a sudden scream pierces through the woods, catching his attention. The cry seems to belong to a young girl, prompting him to channel mana into his feet without hesitation, dashing toward the source. To get a better view, he leaps up onto the branches of a huge tree. From this high vantage point, the scene becomes clear. A group of bandits has seized a small girl. Though she struggles to break free, they've already caught her, muffling her screams by covering her mouth. Since the girl is an elf, the bandits intend to sell her to the nobles for a massive profit once they escape the forest. They quickly bind her and shove her into the back of their carriage. As Arthur witnesses the scene, memories flood his mind. Flashbacks of when he and his own family were ambushed by bandits. He remembers the attackers saying something about sparing him and the women, only to be sold off later. The thought fills him with fury. The first thing that crosses his mind is to kill every last one of the bandits for committing such a vile act. But then he recalls Sylvia's advice about keeping his anger in check, so he pauses to gather his thoughts and cool his head. He understands that if he were to charge in recklessly now, it could endanger the girl's life, so he chooses to hold back and wait for the perfect opportunity to make his move. The bandits climb into their carriage and begin their journey out of the forest, with Arthur silently trailing them from the shadows. As night falls, they don't have any option but to stop and make camp. Unable to navigate in the darkness, Arthur weighs his options. Should he keep following them until they reach a human town, or strike now? But then he catches one of the bandits boasting about how cut is the little girl, and at that moment, Arthur knows he can't afford to wait. He refuses to leave the girl in their hands any longer. Yet, he knows he still has to wait until nightfall before taking action. So Arthur settles down and begins meditating, getting himself mentally ready for the ambush. Once the darkness has settled in enough, Arthur opens his eyes and starts mapping out his attack strategy. That's when he notices the bandits have several forest hounds on leashes, and he finds it strange that those hounds are following the orders of these humans without putting up any sort of fight. He examines the hounds more closely and notices they're all wearing magic collars that are clearly being used to force their obedience, something he might be able to exploit, so he tosses a few rocks toward the wolves to stir them up. The bandits hear the sudden howling from their hounds in that direction, so the leader orders one of his subordinates to quickly check on the hounds. The bandit quickly gets to his feet and delivers a kick to one of the hounds next to silence its barking. But the moment his attention shifts, Arthur takes advantage of the opening. He conjures a mana blade and leaps down behind the bandit, and just a few seconds later, the bandit lies dead from multiple slashes. Arthur grabs the bandit's weapon, and when another arrives to investigate the noise, Arthur leaps onto his back and cuts his throat. Two bandits are down now, but Arthur's body is already wearing out, so he has to finish this fast. Right then, another bandit shows up to see what's keeping the other two, so Arthur attempts to take him out instantly too, but he misses, only slicing the man's leg. The bandit cries out, alerting the rest to Arthur's presence. Their leader quickly figures out Arthur's a mage, realizing this won't be a simple fight. Still, he doesn't want Arthur dead. After After all, selling a mage child on the black market would fetch him even more coin than the elf girl. The leader starts channeling magic into his arms and lunges at Arthur with a swing, prompting Arthur to leap back and attempt a counter with a kick. Though the bandit leader skillfully evades it, Arthur seeks to surprise him by throwing his knife, but the bandit snatches it mid-air and turns it against him. Consequently, Arthur is thrown to the ground, and the bandit hoists him up by the ankles to mock him. The leader taunts Arthur, saying he's no match for an adult in raw strength, and Arthur knows he's right, so instead, he switches tactics and strikes with magic. He throws a fireball straight at the bandit's knee, and as the man cries out in agony, Arthur drives his knife into his skull. With the rest of the bandits dealt with, only the wounded one remains. Arthur finishes him off, then hurries to check on the girl inside the carriage. She's been blindfolded this whole time, completely unaware of what's happened. So Arthur reassures her that the bandits are gone, and she's safe now. Her name is Tesha, and as Arthur helps her out of the carriage, he tells her she's free to return home. But Tesha spots blood on Arthur's hand and becomes deeply concerned for him. Arthur understands that it's typical for children to feel anxious when they see blood, so it may not be wise to let her witness the dead bodies scattered on the ground. He requests Tesha to stay there for a moment and proceeds to drape a tarp over all the bandit corpses. Tesha asks Arthur what became of the men who took her, not wanting to confess that he killed them. Arthur simply explains they had a little accident and won't trouble her again. The girl doesn't press further, so Arthur retrieves her belongings from the bandit's carriage and hands them to her. With a quick farewell, he turns to leave. He still has a long journey home ahead of him, but Tesha suddenly grabs his arm, pleading with him not to go. She's terrified of being left alone. If Arthur abandons her here, she could end up as prey for the tree golems lurking in the forest. He asks if she at least knows the way home, and while she recognizes the direction, she has no clue how far her village actually is. Arthur isn't thrilled about it, but deep down, he knows Tesha won't survive the journey alone. Reluctantly, he agrees to take her home. He takes a look at the hounds, and for a moment, he likes the idea of using them to speed up their travel. Though, since he has no clue how to keep a hound under control, he figures it's best to just leave them behind. However, Tesha insists that they should at least take off the magic collars from the hounds so they can go back to the forest. Arthur cautions her that the wolves might turn aggressive once the collars are removed, but she believes she'll be fine since she hasn't done anything to provoke them. And as someone who lives in this forest, it's her responsibility to care for the creatures that inhabit it. Eventually, she removes the collars from the wolves, and just as expected, they calmly make their way back into the forest. The following morning, Arthur and Tesha start their journey toward the elf village, and after some time, they pause to have a meal. Arthur prepares a simple stew and insists she eat it, explaining that she'll need the strength for the lengthy journey ahead. Tesha finds the stew's aroma odd, being made solely from dried meat and salt, so it's not particularly tasty, but it's better than going hungry. Tesha asks Arthur what brought him to the Elshire forest in the first place, since it's unusual for humans to come here, especially a child traveling alone. Arthur then explains that he was separated from his family and somehow ended up this place. Arthur then asks Tesha what life is like in the kingdom of Eleanor, and she adores it there. Her parents are usually occupied with work, so she mostly spends her time with her servant and her grandpa. They keep moving forward on their journey, but since Tesha has no idea how far her village actually is, it's tough to tell how long the trip is going to take. To make things even more frustrating, the hounds Tesha set free have been trailing them for quite some time now, and Arthur is seriously starting to regret not killing them when he had the chance. That night, Arthur chooses to keep watch outside the tent to ensure the hounds don't attack him and Tesha while they sleep. However, after some time, Tesha peeks her head out and urges Arthur to come to bed. He insists he isn't tired and plans to stay on guard, but she's far too frightened to be left alone, so she begs him to join her inside the tent instead. Arthur finally relents, choosing to stand guard from within the tent to ease Tesha's worries. She tries to act unafraid, but she insists that Arthur remain close to her at all times. Before bedtime, she's curious to learn about the human kingdom and asks Arthur if it's true that all humans are perverts who take multiple wives. Arthur is caught off guard when Tesha says that and asks her where she heard it, so she tells him it was her grandfather who said it. Arthur admits that there are people like that, but insists that most humans are actually pretty modest. Tesha takes his word for it, then rolls over and falls asleep right away. By morning, Arthur and Tesha wake up and continued on their travels. Over the past few days, Tesha has grown quite fond of Arthur, and now that the memory of the slave traders had faded, she seems much happier, though her survival skills were still lacking. She couldn't even manage to cross a river by herself, forcing Arthur to carry her over. Out of nowhere, Arthur feels a strong pain in his chest, and he can't figure out what's causing it. Tesha, visibly concerned, rushes off to search for some medicinal herbs that might be useful, but Arthur has a feeling this isn't just an ordinary sickness. As he leans back against a tree for support, the hound from earlier suddenly appears, and Arthur begins to panic, realizing he's in no shape to defend himself if it chooses to attack. Tesha soon returns with the herbs, so Arthur warns her to stay away because the hound might be dangerous. But to his surprise, the wolf just drops a dead boar in front of Arthur and walks away. Arthur is confused by what just happened, but Tesha assumes the hound was trying to thank him for his help earlier. That evening, Arthur and Tesha make camp and have some roasted meat by the fire. The meal tastes far better than the stew, and Tesha absolutely loves it. Earlier, while she was out looking for medicinal herbs, she stumbled upon some mushrooms, so she shares them with Arthur, though he likely should have refused the odd-looking fungi, because they leave him suffering from a nasty bout of diarrhea. Once Arthur wraps up his business, he's completely exhausted and on the verge of passing out. But Tesha keeps chatting with him. She starts telling Arthur how her grandfather used to read her storybooks about the human and dwarven kingdoms, which made her dream of visiting those lands. Unfortunately, she was never given the chance, since elves have always been wary of people from other races. Just then, Tesha realizes that Arthur hasn't been listening to a single word she said, but she knows he's just sleepy, so she covers him with a blanket and wishes him a good night. The following morning, the pair resumes their journey, but the throbbing in Arthur's chest grows even more intense. Tesha apologizes for not knowing how to ease his suffering, but Arthur reassures her it's nothing serious. Shifting the conversation, she asks if she can call him Art, explaining that she now sees him as a friend. After all, they've shared so much time together and grown incredibly close. Arthur tells her he's fine with being friends, and Tesha seems surprised by how casually he takes it. With a playful grin, Arthur dramatically vows to treasure every second that Tesha considers him a friend, but his teasing only annoys her. She scolds him to quit acting so immature. Arthur finds it amusing that she of all people would call him childish, especially after she was the one pleading with him to stay close because she was afraid. However, Tesha insists that was completely different. Putting that aside, Arthur realizes something. Tesha is actually the first real friend he's ever had. Back in his old world, people feared him too much, and he never had anyone he could truly consider a friend until now. Right at that moment, Tesha notices something that seems familiar, so she calls Arthur over to check it out. Arthur walks over, thinking he might finally see his parents, but instead, he finds himself staring at a massive tree with a portal right in its trunk. Tesha explains that this is the gateway to Elf Village. Then she reaches out her hand and invites him to follow her inside. Sadly, the elves still harbor a deep hatred for humans, so once Arthur steps into the elf village, he's immediately under arrest, and the guards press their blades against his throat. Desperate, he turns to Tesha, hoping she'll speak up for him, but to his astonishment, she just stares at him coldly without saying a single word. Witnessing this, Arthur begins to suspect that Tesha deliberately lured him into a trap, and he can't believe he let himself fall for the idea that someone might genuinely want to be his friend. After everything, he's already endured many betrayals in his previous life. Just as the elves are about to execute him, with Tesha silently watching, it turns out she had no part in this betrayal. It's unclear why she stayed quiet until now, but the moment she hears the guards declare they're going to kill Arthur, she finally speaks up and orders them to stop. One of the guards protests, insisting the boy is nothing but a savage human, but Tesha firmly counters that Arthur isn't a threat. In truth, he's the sole reason she managed to return home safely. Tesha's testimony should have been enough to make the guard pause and rethink executing Arthur, but instead, he dismisses it, presuming Arthur must have manipulated her into believing he's a good person, and thus, the guard still intends to kill him regardless. Yet, before he can finish, an old man steps forward and commands them to release the boy. His name is Virion, Tesha's grandfather and the former king of the elf tribe. Far more rational, he trusts Tesha when she insists that Arthur saved her life. life. He even apologizes to Arthur for treating him so harshly after everything he did to save Tesha. Still, it did seem quite dubious that the missing princess suddenly appeared alongside an unfamiliar boy. Arthur is relieved that he's no longer going to be executed, but he's also completely stunned to learn that Tesha is a princess, since she never bothered to tell him. Despite traveling together for days, Tesha apparently didn't think it was worth mentioning. Right at that moment, Tesha's mother and father arrive, having been told their daughter had finally been brought back, and Tesha immediately rushes into their arms, overjoyed to see them after so long. If Tesha is a princess, then logically, her parents must be the king and queen of Elenoir. Unfortunately, they aren't nearly as reasonable as Virion was. The second Tesha's father notices Arthur, he demands to know why a savage human is standing in his kingdom. He commands his soldiers to seize the human and put him to death on the spot. Yet not a single one of them obeys. Even though he is the reigning king, Virion had already given orders to leave Arthur unharmed, and every last soldier is far too afraid to defy Virion. The elder elf steps in, reminding the king that Arthur was the one who rescued Tesha and brought her home safely, meaning they can't just treat him like some enemy. Tesha, too, insists that Arthur should be received as an honored guest in their castle, not a prisoner. However, her father hesitates to accept this. After all, humans are strictly forbidden from entering the elf kingdom, much less stepping inside the royal castle. But the thought of dealing with Tesha's outburst is enough to sway him, and he grudgingly consents to treating Arthur with proper hospitality. With the misunderstanding now resolved, the group prepares to make their way to the castle. Though, just before they depart, Virion informs Arthur that he wishes to speak with him privately later. Arthur feels a bit cautious around Virion, as he can sense the immense power the old man possesses, but he doesn't have much time to dwell on it, because Tesha quickly pulls him away to give him a tour. It's Arthur's first time seeing the elf kingdom, and he's blown away by how different it is compared to the human kingdom. Still, the hatred against humans remains obvious, as every elf they pass seems to stop whatever they're doing just to stare at Arthur while he walks alongside Tesha toward the castle. However, no one dares to insult him outright, since he now holds the status of an official royal guest. Tesha is the only one who treats him with genuine kindness, but Arthur can't help but keep wondering why she hesitated so long before stepping in when the guards were about to execute him. Right at that moment, the pain in his chest returns, and it's been steadily getting worse with each passing day, though he still has no idea what's behind it. Once they reach the castle, Tesha is warmly welcomed by her servants, and she immediately makes it clear that Arthur is to be treated with kindness and respect, no matter if he's human. With that settled, she turns to Arthur and asks if he wants to go play with her, but Arthur suggests they hold off for now. He figures her parents would want a full account of what happened to Tesha and how the two of them managed to return safely. The group makes their way into the meeting room, and since they're about to have a proper discussion, Tesha insists they should bring out some tea and snacks. Once the refreshments are served, Tesha's father takes the opportunity to introduce himself properly. He reveals his name is Alduin, and he rules as king of Elenoir. His wife is named Muriel, and of course, his father is none other than Virion. Arthur introduces himself as a simple town boy from the kingdom of Sapin, fully aware that someone like him, just a human, would typically never be granted entry into Elenoir, much less an audience with a royal family, so he expresses his gratitude for their hospitality. Alduin is amazed by how composed and mature Arthur acts, especially for someone his age, but more importantly, he's eager to hear the full story about what happened with Tesha and how she ended up going missing. Arthur recounts the full story of how he was separated from his family during a bandit assault and found himself in the Elven Forest, though they omit the detail about encountering Sylvia in the cave. He then describes the moment he met Tesha, explaining that he discovered her in the midst of being abducted by slave traders. Alduin is furious that humans had the audacity to attempt selling Tesha into slavery, but Arthur points out that elves have also engaged in the crime of slave trading, so it's not solely a human vice. Setting that aside, Virion inquires how Arthur succeeded in rescuing Tesha from the slave traders. Arthur then reveals that he eliminated them all. When one of the guards hears this, he begins shouting that it's impossible for a child to have taken down slave traders alone, but Virion quickly silences him, warning that he won't say it again. Arthur doesn't appear to be lying, so Alduin says he's inclined to believe his story, and now that everyone is on the same page about what happened, Arthur mentions that he has a favor to ask. task. As he already explained, he ended up stranded in the forest following the bandit attack, so he's hoping they can help him return home. Alduin is furious that a human would have the audacity to request a favor from the elven family, but considering Arthur went out of his way to safely bring Tesha home, it's only right that they repay the debt. Besides, if Alduin refuses to assist Arthur, he'll have to endure Tesha's inevitable outburst, and he'd rather avoid that. Reluctantly, he agrees to help. However, the teleportation gate leading back to Sapin is currently sealed and can only be activated once every 7 years during the summit between the leaders of the three kingdoms. Since the last meeting was 2 years ago, Arthur would need to wait another 5 before the portal becomes accessible again. Arthur isn't willing to wait that long, and Alduin also dislikes the thought of a human remaining in Eleanor for 5 years, so he decides to have a group of soldiers guide Arthur back to Sapin. He wants the boy gone as quickly as possible, but since it's already quite late, he says Arthur can rest here for the night and depart in the morning. Arthur expresses his gratitude for Alduin's decision to help him return home, but the pain in his chest keeps intensifying, and Virion appears to pick up on the fact that something isn't right with him. A little while later, a room has been prepared for Arthur in the castle, and he is currently taking a bath, but the pain just keeps getting worse and worse, so Arthur is getting worried that he might die. After his bath, he walks out onto the balcony to get some fresh air in hopes that it will help with the pain. He feels a little better now, but he needs to figure out the cause of his constant pain before something bad happens. Right then, Arthur glances upward and spots Tesha along with her parents standing on the balcony above him, and the sight of them brings his own parents to mind. He still doesn't know if Reynold and Alice survived the bandit assault, but he's aware of how strong they are, so they must have found a way to make it through. Even so, he deeply wishes he could speak with them at this moment. Just then, Tesha notices Arthur, and she can tell that he looks sad, so after she's done with her parents, she goes to talk to him. Once she finally catches up to Arthur, she apologizes for how rudely her father treated him, but Arthur says he doesn't mind. He understands why Alduin would behave like that, since there have been decades of wars between the elves and the humans, so of course it would be hard for him to trust a human, especially when his daughter is involved. Thinking about parents makes Arthur remember how far he is from his own, and he can't help but worry that they might not be glad to see him. After all, their whole trip had been for his benefit, so they might end up blaming him for everything that happened. He also holds himself responsible for failing to protect his family during the bandit attack and getting separated from them. But just then, Tesha grabs his face and shakes his head. She doesn't know much about Arthur's parents, but if they're anything like her own, then she's certain they'll be happy to see him when he finally makes it back. At that moment, the hallway becomes illuminated by a bunch of fireflies, and in the middle of their radiant light, Arthur begins trying to picture his parents' smiling faces. Ever since he was reborn into this world, they've been by his side, and not once have they made him feel unloved. So then, why is he so afraid that they might resent him for what happened? He has been letting his trauma from his past life cloud his judgment with suspicion for a while now. He even suspected Tesha of backstabbing him earlier, but when he looks at her now, all he sees is an innocent girl who would never want to hurt her friend. Suddenly, Arthur senses something flying directly toward Tesha, so he quickly catches it and instantly channels his mana, ready to strike back at whoever launched it. But to his surprise, it turns out Virion was the one who threw it. Arthur can't believe Virion would do something as cruel as try to harm his own granddaughter, but Virion assures him that he never meant to hurt Tesha. The projectiles he tossed were merely a couple of glowing fireflies, and she wouldn't have even felt them. However, he still finds it impressive that Arthur was able to react and counterattack so quickly. The reason Virion pulled this stunt was to verify whether Arthur was telling the truth about possessing the strength to kill those slave traders, and he was clearly telling the truth. Tesha runs over and tells Virion to stop messing with Arthur, but that's not why he came here. He noticed something interesting about Arthur earlier, so he wants to have a little sparring match with him to see how strong he really is. Virion summons a sword using his magic for Arthur to use in their fight and moves Tesha out of harm's way so she won't get injured. Arthur accepts the challenge and rushes forward, swinging at Virion, but Virion is far too quick. Even when Arthur enhances his speed with mana, he still can't match Virion's movements, and just when it seems like he's found a chance to strike, Virion breaks Arthur's sword with a strike from his palm. A shard of the broken wood flies toward Tesha, so Arthur Arthur hurls the remaining piece of his sword to block it and keep her safe. Arthur launches an attack at Virion using only his mana, but Virion responds by meeting him with his own mana. The sheer power of Virion is utterly dominant, leaving Arthur with little hope of defeating him. Yet Arthur isn't the type to back down. After Virion sends him flying, Arthur instantly rushes forward again, this time striking Virion squarely on the forehead. The hit didn't deal much damage, but Virion is stunned that Arthur managed to break through his defenses and actually land a blow. Eager for a second round, he's suddenly interrupted when Tesha pinches his backside and scolds him for bullying Arthur. Arthur reassures them that it's fine. In fact, he's almost honored that someone as strong as Virion considers him a worthy opponent. Seizing the moment, Virion then tells Arthur that he wants to take him on as his disciple. Arthur is taken aback and questions Virion if he being serious, though this clearly isn't the kind of thing Virion would ever joke about, so he presses Arthur, asking whether he'll accept the offer. Arthur hesitates, unsure how to respond, particularly because he still hasn't managed to let his parents know that he's alive. Virion reassures Arthur that if that's his only concern, he knows a way for Arthur to speak with his parents immediately. Arthur is curious, but before he can respond, another strong pain shoots through his chest, and Virion appears to understand the reason behind it. He informs Arthur that he has received a beast will, and if Arthur does not consent to becoming his disciple, the pain on his chest will kill him sooner or later. Upon receiving such dreadful news, Arthur tries to sleep, but rest doesn't come easily. The fear of being separated from his family, along with the looming possibility of his own death, plunges him into a horrifying nightmare where a demon torments him. Suddenly, he hears a voice calling his name. When he opens his eyes, he sees Tesha on top of him. She's been attempting to wake him up for some time, but he keeps muttering about a monster, which is beginning to frustrate her. She urges him to quickly prepare, as Virion is already outside waiting. Arthur rises from bed and begins to change his clothes. As he dresses, Tesha inquires if he truly intends to remain here and train under her grandfather. However, Arthur hasn't made up his mind yet. His choice hinges on whether Virion can indeed connect him with his family, for as long as Arthur has the opportunity to speak with his parents and assure them of his safety, he will feel content. After getting dressed, Arthur and Tesha make their way downstairs together. However, the moment they open the doors, they overhear Alduin in a heated argument with Virion. Alduin can't bear the idea of allowing Arthur to stay in the Elf Kingdom. It would defy centuries of elven tradition for Virion to accept him as a disciple, but Virion remains unmoved. He's taken a liking to Arthur, and he's determined to make him his disciple, no matter who tries to stand in his way. Tesha attempts to defend Arthur, but Alduin refuses to listen to her perspective since it's obvious she supports Arthur remaining with them. By chance, Virion isn't interested in Alduin's viewpoint either. Because of this, he instructs Arthur and Tesha to board the carriage, as they have places to go. During their journey to meet Virion's acquaintance, the trip drags on for so long that Tesha eventually falls asleep. Arthur questions Virion about whether their arrival will still take a while, but this time, he calls him Grandpa. Virion is surprised on how fast Arthur has abandoned formalities, though if everything goes well and Arthur stays under his guidance, he might as well be considered family. The casual way Arthur speaks doesn't bother Virion at all. In fact, he's happy that Tesha finally has a friend to spend time with. Being an only child, she is the only heir to the throne. Because of this, most of the other children keep their distance from her. The few who did get close inevitably shattered her trust in some way. As a result, Tesha struggles to open up to new people, yet when she's with Arthur, she always appears to be enjoying herself immensely. For this, Virion is deeply grateful. Arthur, too, has deep-seated trust issues, but when he looks at Virion, all he perceives is a genuine, kind-hearted man, someone he instinctively feels he can rely on. The carriage finally reaches their destination. After waking Tessie up, everyone exits the carriage. Arthur is curious about the identity of this enigmatic individual, reasoning that they must hold great significance if someone as influential as Virion would travel all this way just to meet them. Virion can't wait any longer, so he stomps toward the door and shouts for Rinia to come out immediately. As he leans in, pressing his ear against the door to listen for any movement inside, he's suddenly struck in the face when the door swings open. After collecting himself, Virion presents Rinia as a sorceress with rare abilities. Given her expertise, he's confident she can assist Arthur in reaching out to his family. She welcomes them inside so they can begin right away. However, once they step in, all Arthur notices is an ordinary-looking home with nothing but a simple bucket of water resting on the table. This makes him question just how she plans to help him. Rhaenyra reveals that she belongs to a rare category of mages known as diviners. As a diviner, she possesses the ability to look into both the past and future of individuals. She briefly channels her powers toward Arthur and instantly senses that he is no ordinary child. Certain portions of his past remain obscured from her vision. However, even if she could see more, her understanding would still be limited, as her power only grants her fleeting glimpses of fragmented memories. That being said, Arthur didn't visit to have her look into his past. His purpose was to reassure his family that he's safe. Rhaenyra slides the bucket of water toward Arthur, instructing him to focus deeply on his parents for the best outcome. She then starts channeling her abilities, and within moments, visions of his parents begin to appear to Arthur. Alice has just completed cooking a pot of stew for dinner, far more than the two of them could possibly eat. Reynald adores this dish, but neither of them can truly savor it with Arthur missing. For all they know, he might have died after that terrible fall from the cliff. The guilt consumed Reynald so deeply that he nearly succumbed to alcoholism. Yet, with his wife pregnant and in need of care, he had no choice but to abandon the search for their son and retreat to the city instead. In the city, Reynald found work and, within just a few weeks, managed to earn enough to buy a house. Yet, no amount of prosperity could ease the pain of Arthur's absence. In that moment, they suddenly hear his voice. Though they can't see him, Arthur reassures them that he's alive and safe, currently residing in the elven kingdom of Elenoir. He admits he doesn't fully understand how it works, but with the help of a friend, he's using a rare form of magic to communicate with them across the distance. He wants to come back home, but at the moment, he can't do that because there's something wrong with his body. He needs treatment, and without it, he won't survive. Still, he promises that as soon as he's healed, he'll return to them. He just doesn't know exactly how long that recovery will take. He also doesn't want them to carry any guilt over what happened, because it was his decision, and if he had to make that choice again to protect his family, he wouldn't think twice. Reynald and Alice are overjoyed to learn that Arthur is still alive, but having to part ways with them once more brings tears to Arthur's eyes. Even so, he's grateful that he had the chance to speak with them again, and he's made up his mind he will never put them through that kind of worry again. In order to keep that promise, he knows he must grow stronger. So, he turns to Varian and asks to become his disciple. Now they just need to convince Alduin to agree to let Arthur live in the castle. Alduin is still against the idea because of his deep hatred for the humans, but Tesha reminds him that Arthur saved her, so if he kicks him out, then he'd be seen as an ungrateful elf. Alduin still attempts to argue that Arthur's presence could spark a major incident within the elf kingdom if anything were to go wrong, but Varian has already considered that possibility. He instructs Alduin to make a public announcement declaring Arthur as his new disciple, because with Varian's authority, no one would dare to object or raise a complaint about Arthur staying there, and with that, Arthur is officially granted permission to reside in the royal palace. Once the meeting concludes, Alduin approaches Arthur to apologize for how he behaved earlier. While he may not be fond of humans in general, Arthur seems like a good kid, and since Arthur saved Tesha, Alduin feels it's his responsibility, as her father, to repay that debt. He tells Arthur that he can now consider himself part of the family. Arthur is a bit taken aback by how quickly Alduin and Muriel changed their attitude toward him. But then again, both Varian and Tesha had spoken up for him a great deal, so it makes sense that Alduin would come around. Arthur thanks Alduin and says it's an honor to be welcomed into the royal castle. But Tesha interrupts and says this isn't good enough. If they are really going to welcome Arthur, then she wants Arthur to be allowed to play outside with her, and considering the fact that Alduin has already accepted Arthur, he has no objections to him and Tesha playing together. With permission granted, Tesha eagerly pulls Arthur out into town to give him a tour. Once again, he finds himself fascinated by elven culture. Tesha is quite familiar with this area, so she informs Arthur that just down the road, there's a shop filled with delicious fruits and sweets. However, she warns him that it's extremely popular. If they don't move quickly, all the treats might be gone. Grabbing his arm, she tugs him along to pick up the pace, and Arthur follows after her with a smile. But then he accidentally bumps into a kid along the way. it was an honest mistake, but the kid starts insulting Arthur and yelling at him for getting his filthy human germs all over him. At this point, Arthur is wondering how this kid has the balls to be so rude when he is within punch range. But Tesha tells him to just ignore him because it's not worth causing trouble over something as minor as this. Typically, Arthur would have chosen the mature path and simply walked away from Faerith. But when Faerith begins insisting that Tesha shouldn't associate with someone as lowly as Arthur and should instead spend her time with him, Faerith, a member of the elven nobility, clearly has a high opinion of himself. So, Arthur decides to toy with him a bit. He acts like he's thrilled to meet Faerith, but deliberately mispronounces his name. Faerith gets mad that Arthur mispronounced his name, so Arthur apologizes and acts like it was a mistake. He says he will be sure to pay proper respect to Faerith the next time they meet and turns around so he can leave with Tesha. But Faerith stops him. He may be insufferable, but he's not stupid, so he figured out that Arthur was intentionally being sarcastic, and he refuses to let such disrespect go unpunished. He challenges Arthur to a duel with the honor of his family name on the line, and Arthur can't believe he was really dumb enough to request a duel. Tesha intervenes, telling Faerith that even as a noble, he's taking things too far. Faerith responds that challenging someone to a duel is only natural when they've dishonored his name. However, Tesha counters by reminding Faerith that Arthur is Virian's disciple. It would be foolish to pick a fight with the disciple of the kingdom's most powerful man. Yet Faerith remains convinced there's no way he could lose to a mere human. He then warns Arthur that refusing the duel would shame Virian's name. Arthur is still trying to wrap his head around this whole thing. In his old world, a duel was always a battle to the death, so it makes no sense for a kid to carelessly challenge him to a duel here. But judging by the mildly entertained looks on the adults nearby, it seems that duels aren't death battles here, so Arthur has no reason to refuse. Tesha asks Arthur if he's sure he wants to do this, and he says he is fine with it. So the duel becomes official, and the two get ready to fight. The duel starts, and Faerith charges at Arthur with a stick, full of confidence. Everyone has a plan until they get hit, and Faerith definitely wasn't prepared for that. He collapses, knocked out cold, prompting his friends to hurry over and see if he's alright. However, Tesha already knew this was how it would play out. With the duel now finished, she takes Arthur's hand and pulls him along. After all, she still has plenty of things she wants to do with him. The two of them spend the whole day going from shop to shop, exploring everything the stores have to offer. Once they've had their fill of fun, they step out onto a balcony to rest and chat. Tesha mentions that Arthur's training with Virian begins the next day, but Arthur appears a little depressed. It's evidently he's preoccupied with something on his mind. Arthur recalls a discussion he once had with Virian. Virian made it perfectly clear his training would be nothing short of hellish. To put it in words, it would be like being dipped in boiling pitch, and Arthur would have to endure this agony daily, year after year, far from the comfort of his family. So Virian asked him if was he really prepared for this. Arthur's answer was simple: yes. Even now, Arthur feels eager to start his training tomorrow, despite knowing how difficult it will be, because gaining strength is the only way to forge the future he wants. Tesha promises Arthur that she'll push herself just as hard, refusing to be left behind. But for now, she's determined to make the most of their time together, so she proposes they grab something more to eat. Several years have gone by, and under Virian's guidance, both Arthur and Tesha have been training diligently. During this time, they've grown close, though Tesha's competitive nature has pushed them both to work extremely hard. After a long session today, Tesha has exhausted herself completely, and while she takes a break, Virian seizes the opportunity to teach Arthur about magic. Once someone has stabilized their mana, they gain the ability to wield elemental magic, whether it be water, fire, wind, or earth. However, in this world, the elements one can master are largely determined by their race. Take elves, for instance. They have a natural talent for wind magic, along with strong aptitudes for water and earth. Fire, on the other hand, tends to be incompatible with them. On the other hand, dwarves excel particularly in earth and fire elemental magic. However, humans are capable of using all four elements, though their affinity for any single one can vary greatly depending on how much they've trained. Tesha lifts lifts her hand and questions Virion. Why hasn't he had Arthur train with his mana core if it's so crucial? Virion responds that, at the moment, Arthur just isn't strong enough to endure it. His body holds a beast will, and while it can provide immense power, it also disrupts the link between Arthur's physical form and his mana core. That instability is what's causing the pain in his chest, so before he can resume mana training, he must first fully reassimilate his mana core. Tesha playfully claims this proves she's stronger than Arthur at the moment, but he shouts back that naturally she'd have the upper hand since her attacks are all enhanced with mana. Among the elves, someone is considered gifted if they awaken their mana by age 10, yet Tesha could wield magic at just 9. That's why she's been training side by side with Arthur all this time. Since Arthur's training has been advancing steadily, Virion decides it's finally time to awaken his beast will. If the process succeeds, the constant pain in Arthur's chest should disappear completely, becoming an official beast tamer through this ritual. Arthur expresses his gratitude to Virion and urges him to begin immediately. As Arthur takes a seat and Virion starts the awakening, Tesha watches with concern, unsure if Arthur will truly be alright. Virion reassures her, admitting that while Arthur might feel some intense heat, it shouldn't be unbearable. But the moment Virion starts awakening the beast will, Arthur lets out a scream of agony as an overwhelming surge of energy explodes from his body, so powerful that it violently throws both Virion and Tesha backward. While the awakening itself technically succeeded, the immense strain it places on Arthur's body causes him to collapse unconscious on the spot, leaving both Virion and Tesha deeply concerned. They carry Arthur back to the castle and lay him down to rest, giving him time to recover. When Arthur finally wakes up, he sees Virion sitting beside the bed, watching over him. Virion asks if he's feeling okay, and Arthur replies that he seems fine. Curious, Virion then questions whether there's anything unusual about the beast will Arthur received, because a reaction as intense as his almost never occurs. Arthur had planned to keep his meeting with Sylvia hidden, but seeing no reason to conceal it any longer, he finally admits to Virion that his beast will was a gift from a dragon. The revelation leaves Virion stunned. He struggles to believe it at first, yet he can't ignore the fact that the sheer power radiating from Arthur's beast will undeniably resembles that of a dragon's. Virion warns him that he must never speak of his dragon will to anyone. If this secret were to spread, it would draw unwanted attention his way. Having said that, Virion informs Arthur that he's set to return home in just 4 months, meaning he'll need to stay cautious once he departs. Arthur is taken aback. He'd assumed he still had 2 years before the next interrace meeting, but as it turns out, a cultural exchange event was recently arranged, so the portals to Xyrus City will reopen in 4 months. Arthur asks Virion if Tesha has been told yet. She'd be heartbroken to learn he's leaving so suddenly. Virion replies that her parents are currently explaining everything to her. That night, as Arthur lies in bed holding the egg Sylvia entrusted to him, he struggles to accept that he'll be parting ways with Tesha in just 4 short months. Suddenly, he notices something. The egg begins to hatch. Moments later, a tiny dragon emerges. Arthur is initially concerned, but the creature is so small and adorable that it couldn't possibly hurt anyone, so he gently scoops it up into his hands. But then the dragon sinks its teeth into his arm. Arthur stumbles back and lets go of the dragon, but when he examines the place where he was bitten, he doesn't see ordinary bite marks. Instead, a crest begins to form. This crest creates a connection between Arthur and the dragon, allowing him to feel what the dragon is thinking, even if he doesn't fully comprehend it. Since he'll be the one raising the dragon, he makes the choice to name it Sylvie, after her mother, Sylvia. He then falls back asleep, but the following day Tesha enters Arthur's room, intending to talk to him about his departure in 4 months. However, as she lifts the covers to wake him, she notices Sylvie lying beside him in bed. Arthur wakes up confused, thinking at first that something might be wrong, but soon realizes that Tesha is simply playing with Sylvie, so he decides to go right back to sleep. That same day, Arthur and Tesha head to the training grounds for their session with Virion, with Tesha doing her utmost to win Sylvie's affection. However, after nearly squeezing her too tightly earlier, Sylvie keeps her distance from Tesha. When they finally spot Virion, and the moment he notices Sylvie on Arthur's head, he almost has a heart attack, never having dreamed he'd witness a real dragon in his lifetime. As Tesha keeps playing with Sylvie, Arthur explains that Sylvie only hatched because of the beast will awaken awakening he experienced the day before. He worries that having Sylvie around could cause trouble. If people figured out she was a dragon, it would be disastrous, but Virion reassures him, saying there's no need to stress over it. Dragons are little more than legends these days, so nobody would ever guess Arthur's little companion is actually one. All he has to do is pass her off as some rare creature that simply resembles a dragon. Putting that aside, it's time for them to start today's training. Virion informs Arthur that now that he's awakened his beast will, he'll need to train both his beast core and mana core at the same time, and the most effective way to do that is through real combat experience. With that, Virion begins to transform. Once the transformation is complete, he announces that Arthur's training begins immediately. Arthur prepares for an attack, but Virion merely takes a single step forward and disappears. Arthur attempts to defend himself, but tracking Virion's movements proves impossible. He has no clue where the attack might come from. He senses Virion's presence lingering nearby, yet despite his best efforts, he can't detect even the slightest hint of his location. It's an incredible skill, but Arthur isn't eager to get pummeled just for a demonstration. Without hesitation, he throws his hands up in surrender. The moment he does, Virion materializes behind him and Arthur is frustrated because fighting him is just too unfair. Virion could have struck Arthur at any moment during that exchange, and Arthur still wouldn't have had the slightest idea where he was. All thanks to Virion's beast will, which belongs to a shadow panther. This gives him the ability to manipulate the wind with such precision that he can completely control and even erase every trace of sound he produces. Though his transformation is undeniably formidable, it isn't flawless, as it consumes an enormous amount of his mana. Anyway, Virion never really intended to fight Arthur in that form to begin with. He just wanted to show off a little, and now that he has demonstrated how powerful a beast will can be, he summons a sword so Arthur can begin his real training. Several days pass, and Arthur's control over his beast will has improved dramatically. The constant pain in his chest has faded, and his body has adapted enough that he can now match Virion's shadow form and speed. But more than that, he's been able to enjoy the rest of his time simply playing with Tesha. Then, during another one of their trips, Arthur unexpectedly runs into Faerith right there in the middle of the street. However, he doesn't recognize him at all, and Faerith feels insulted, so he demands another duel with Arthur. Of course, that goes about as well as last time. So Faerith ends up on the floor, and his friends stand over him, wondering how he managed to lose in half a second. Arthur still doesn't recognize who Faerith is, so Tesha jogs his memory, explaining that he's the boy who once challenged Arthur to a duel years ago. Recalling how much fun he had that day, Arthur offers Faerith a hand, treating him as a friend now. Faerith takes his hand, no longer interested in fighting Arthur. Arthur asks if Faerith and his friends will be participating in the cultural exchange event coming up in a few months. Faerith confidently says yes, boasting that he was selected due to his outstanding skills, though, in truth, all the noble-born children were simply invited to attend. Hearing that, they ask if Tesha will also be attending the event, but it seems she won't. Faerith explains that the royal family can't afford to let their delicate princess get lost again. However, Tesha takes great offense at being called delicate, and in a burst of anger, she punches Faerith, sending him flying. The blow knocks Faerith out cold, and realizing how bad this makes her look, Tesha freezes, so Arthur quickly grabs her and dashes away before people can gather. Once they are a safe distance away, Arthur yells at Tesha because a princess can't go around punching her subjects for no reason. Although it's not like Arthur has much of a right to complain about violence with how he lived his past life. Tesha doesn't understand what the big deal is because she's fairly certain that Faerith is still alive. But Arthur is yelling at her just like her father, so she calls him an old man and runs off crying. That night, Tesha is still upset, crying alone in her room. Wanting to lift her spirits, Arthur quietly slips up to her window and asks if she'd like to join him for a walk outside. She agrees, but as they wander through the trees, she hesitates and asks if this is truly okay. Arthur reassures her there's no need to worry. Even if they somehow stumble upon kidnappers, they're strong enough to get away easily. And anyway, he adds, the sight of the night sky is worth taking the chance. Arthur checks with Tesha to see if she's feeling sleepy, and though she's obviously close to collapsing, she firmly claims she's okay. Arthur assures her she can rest if she needs to. But since this could be the final chance for Tesha Tesha to share meaningful time with Arthur like this. She declares she'll stay awake. Yet, Tesha's so drowsy that she begins imagining monsters lurking in the trees, and Arthur is amused that she's still afraid of ghosts at her age. Tesha says that she's not frightened by ghosts, insisting her trembling is just from the cold, so she tosses more wood onto the fire. She asks Arthur to share a little about the human kingdom to help keep her awake, but Arthur isn't very familiar with it since he's never actually visited. Tesha says she wishes Arthur could stay here forever, and he feels the same way, but if he stays, he'll never reunite with his family again. He tries to keep the conversation going, but Tesha is already sleeping, so Arthur decides it's time to return for the night. The moment of Arthur's departure has finally arrived, but before he departs, Varian presents him with a gift. It's a unique compass designed to guide Arthur back to the Elf Kingdom should he ever wish to return. Grateful, Arthur expresses his thanks, but his attention shifts when he realizes Tesha is absent. He asks about her whereabouts, only to learn that she couldn't bring herself to witness him leaving. As the portal opens and Arthur prepares to step through, he suddenly hears Tesha's voice calling out his name. She sprints down the street, desperate to reach him, but stumbles and falls. Seeing this, Arthur rushes over to make sure she's okay. He reaches out a hand to lift her up, and Tesha starts warning Arthur that he'd better look after himself while he's away. Arthur can tell how deeply she cares, so he pulls her to her feet and wraps her in one last hug, whispering that he's really going to miss her. Upon reaching the city of Xyrus, Arthur is reunited with his parents and discovers he now has a younger sister named Elena. For years, Alice and Reynold have been sharing stories about Arthur with her, so she's thrilled to finally meet him. Once they step inside, Alice quickly starts questioning Arthur about his well-being. The last time they spoke, he had mentioned feeling ill, so she's eager to find out if he has recovered. Arthur reassures her that he's fine and there's no need for concern, though he still has plenty to share. He then recounts everything that happened after being separated from his family, though he carefully omits any mention of meeting Sylvia or inheriting her beast will. Instead, he tells them about encountering Tesha and describes the time he spent in the Elf Kingdom while recovering from his illness. Alice questions whether he's truly okay, warning him that if his condition were to worsen again, they wouldn't be able to treat him here. Arthur, however, insists that won't happen. Since he can't reveal the truth about his beast will, he fabricates an explanation, claiming his illness was due to awakening too early, which destabilized his mana core. Though it bothers him to deceive his parents, Arthur knows it's necessary, until he grows strong enough to handle any potential dangers. Revealing everything would be too risky. At that moment, Reynold catches sight of Sylvie and asks Arthur about her origin. Arthur quickly fabricates a story, saying he discovered Sylvie inside a mana beast's cave. From that point on, he chose to take her in and made her his pet. Elena appears to get along with her just fine. On that note, Reynold still has more things he wants to know, so he stands up and asks Arthur what stage his mana core is currently at. Alice scolds Reynold, accusing him of trying to start a fight with Arthur right after he returned from a long trip, but Reynold doesn't see anything wrong with wanting to gauge how much stronger his son has become. Arthur isn't bothered by the questions, but before responding further, he's curious about Reynold's occupation. How else could they afford such a comfortable home? Reynold clarifies that he serves as a security instructor at the Helstia auction house and reveals that his mana core has reached the dark orange stage. Arthur is genuinely impressed by this revelation, since reaching an orange level mana core is no small feat. Mana cores span a spectrum from black to white, with the core growing stronger as its color lightens. Reynold, being an augmenter, clearly dedicates significant effort to physical training. Feeling quite proud of himself, Reynold asks Arthur what stage his mana core has reached, and Arthur replies that he's at the light red stage. Reynold lets out a curse when he realizes that Arthur is almost at his level, completely forgetting that Elena is still in the room. He still can't wrap his head around the fact that Arthur is so close from overtaking him in strength, and he refuses to accept that without a challenge, so he tells Arthur to spar with him in the garden right away. Arthur accepts the challenge, but before they can step outside, the living room doors burst open as few strangers enter, inquiring whether Reynolds' son has returned yet. Reynolds presents the man to Arthur as Vincent Helstia, the proprietor of the auction house where Reynolds is employed. Both Vincent and his wife, Tabitha, express their delight at finally meeting Arthur, as she's heard countless stories about him. Arthur, in turn, replies that the honor is his. Vincent can't help but remark on Arthur's politeness, joking that such refined manners certainly couldn't have been learned from Reynolds. Continuing the introductions, Vincent and Tabitha present their daughter, Lilia, to Arthur. Initially, she appears quite shy around him, but the moment she notices Sylvie perched on Arthur's shoulder, she's completely in love. She asks Arthur if she can pet Sylvie, and as soon as he agrees, she eagerly scoops the creature into her arms, showering it with affection. While Lilia is busy with that, Reynolds lets Arthur know that this house belongs to Vincent, so it might be a good idea to get his approval before they end up breaking anything. The moment Reynolds brings up the possibility of destruction, Vincent starts to get nervous, and his concerns are quickly validated when he learns that Reynolds and Arthur are having a sparring match in the garden. The group makes their way outside to observe the duel, though Vincent hesitates, questioning whether it's truly appropriate for Arthur and Reynolds to spar. He struggles to accept that someone Arthur's age could have already reached the light red core stage. However, Alice reassures him that Arthur has always been a fast learner, and besides, he'd have no reason to fabricate such a claim. So Tabitha tells Vincent to relax and simply enjoy the spectacle. In truth, Arthur could have advanced to the orange stage years ago, but during his time training with his beast will, he wasn't permitted to work on his mana core. Even so, he's got a few other tricks he's eager to show off. As the match gets underway, Arthur and Reynolds start exchanging blows, and Reynolds is genuinely impressed by how much stronger Arthur has become, though he still manages to overpower him when it comes to raw strength. Eventually, some space opens up between them, and Reynolds says he wants to take things up a level, igniting his hand in flames and telling Arthur he still has a chance to back out if he wants to. In this world, every mage possesses an elemental affinity, a type of mana they resonate with most naturally. While conjurers can effortlessly wield their aligned element, augmenters typically struggle to do the same. That said, there's a notable exception. Once an augmenter advances to a high enough level, they gain the ability to recognize their elemental compatibility and channel it to enhance their physical strikes. Reynolds has become much harder to handle after imbuing his body with fire magic. So Arthur makes the decision to go all out as well, pouring mana into his arms. The two collide once more, and now the fight is far more evenly balanced. Yet Arthur is still forced back by Reynolds' raw strength. Thanks to the knowledge from his past life, Arthur's training with Virion was incredibly productive, allowing him to fully master fire magic much earlier than expected. Because of this, Virion suggested he might want to push beyond ordinary fire. And what we're seeing now is the outcome of that rigorous training. Once more, Arthur channels mana into his hands, but now, sparks of electricity flicker around him as he summons lightning. Reynolds is stunned. He can hardly believe Arthur has truly mastered an advanced form of fire magic. Yet Arthur isn't finished. Even as he wields lightning, he also manipulates the water from the fountain, sending it surging toward his father from behind. Though Reynolds manages to block the strike, he's completely astonished that Arthur can command both fire and water elements at once. He's never been prouder of his son, so he pulls Arthur into a hug and asks where he picked up a move like that, and if he's got any other cool tricks up his sleeve. Arthur says he only just started learning how to use lightning magic, and while he's still not great at controlling it, he's definitely improving. That's when Elena rushes out onto the field to make sure both Arthur and Reynolds are okay. Meanwhile, Vincent and Tabitha just stand there in awe because no normal kid should be capable of what Arthur just did. That evening, as they gather for dinner, Vincent can't stop raving about how remarkable Arthur is. Reynolds remarks that he's known Arthur was extraordinary ever since the boy first awakened his mana at just 3 years old. Vincent finds this hard to believe. After all, even the most prodigious talents in this world don't awaken their mana until around the age of 8, although most geniuses don't blow up their house in the process. Reynolds bursts out in laughter when he recalls that incident, but maybe he laughed a little too hard because he ends up falling over in his chair. At that moment, Vincent rises from his seat and proposes the idea of Arthur enrolling in Xyrus Academy. The suggestion takes Reynold by surprise. He had never even entertained such a thought before, since Xyrus Academy is an elite institution primarily attended by the wealthy and powerful mages of their world. Tabitha nods in agreement with Vincent, adding that they'd be willing to pay for Arthur's tuition. After all, someone with his extraordinary talent is destined for greatness. However, Alice hesitates to accept their generosity. They've already done so much for the family, and now offering to cover Arthur's education feels like too much. Besides, Arthur is just 8 years old, and the Academy's minimum enrollment age is 10. Vincent says he already thought of that, and due to the nature of his work, he happens to know the director of the Academy personally, so if he talks to her about it, he's sure he can get an exception for Arthur. However, before Vincent can say anything else, Arthur chimes in and says it would be nice if they asked for his opinion before making a decision like that. He just reunited with his family today, and he'd prefer to spend some time with them before anyone starts talking about sending him off to school. He then excuses himself from the dinner table and starts walking through the halls, but he still isn't familiar with the layout of this house yet. Just then, Lilia calls out to him and warns that Arthur might get lost in the basement if he continues heading that way. Lilia instructs Arthur to follow her. She guides him to one of the break rooms where the household servants are gathered. The servants greet Lilia warmly, as she frequently visits during her free time. Even though Arthur only arrived today, they all recognize him. After all, he set the garden on fire during his earlier confrontation with Reynold. Arthur offers an apology for the inconvenience he caused, but none of them seem particularly upset about it. Lilia checks with Maria to see if there's any duck remaining, and Maria confirms there is, though she cautions Lilia to watch her portions as she's been putting on a bit of weight recently. One of the maids explains to Arthur that Lilia frequently visits this place whenever she feels overwhelmed. Her parents are pushing her relentlessly to awaken as a sorcerer, forcing her to attend lessons constantly, while Lilia herself does want to become a mage. The constant pressure wears on her, so she needs to escape and unwind from time to time. Later that night, Arthur is spending some time with his parents, and they are still really excited to have their little Arthur back. He looks a lot different compared to the last time they saw him, but he's still the same person on the inside. Thanks to Arthur's incredible talent, he's certain to become a powerful mage someday, but regardless of that, his parents would always love him just the same. They'd love to chat longer, but they figure Arthur must be exhausted after such a long day, so they stand up and bid him good night. Before heading out, though, Reynold wants to address what Vincent mentioned earlier. He might come across as insistent, but everything he said was for Arthur's own good, and of course, no one would force him to attend the academy if he truly didn't want to. The following morning, Arthur wakes up in a hurry and dashes downstairs. He's got visitors waiting to see him. The Twin Horns squad had caught wind of Arthur's return and decided to drop by for a visit. While Arthur's delighted to reunite with them, Angela's even more thrilled, immediately sweeping him up in a tight hug. After Angela finally releases her grip, Arthur exchanges greetings with the rest of the group. But then, without warning, Jasmine begins running her hands over Arthur's body, inspecting him closely. It might seem a little strange, but she's just making sure Arthur didn't sustain any injuries. Once she's certain he's alright, she hugs him and says sorry for what occurred. She feels responsible for failing to protect Arthur when he got separated from the others that day, so seeing him unharmed brings her immense relief. After some time passes, everyone finally settles and so they can all catch up, and Arthur is taken aback when he hears that the Twin Horns actually stayed for a while in the distant city of Estiston. They landed a highly profitable job there, but in the end, they had to return to the capital for another mission. Listening to their stories made Arthur understand just how little he actually knows about the kingdom of Sapin, not to mention the vast continent of Dickathon. Becoming an adventurer could be a great way to explore the world, but that would require leaving his family behind once more, and he isn't entirely sure he's ready for that. Arthur finds himself back in his room a few days later, training with his beast will. When he makes a discovery, it allows him to stop time. However, at his current level, he can only hold time frozen for a few seconds, and each attempt leaves him completely drained. He begins to question whether all this effort is truly worth it for a power he doesn't fully grasp. But then, he reminds himself of the reason he's pushing so hard to protect the people he cares about. No matter how difficult it gets, he's determined to keep training. But right before that, he notices just how bad Sylvie smells. So without hesitation, he scoops her up for a bath. Sylvie absolutely despises being washed, but Arthur isn't about to let her roam around filthy inside this mansion. And while he's thinking about the mansion, since the Helstia family lives in such luxury, their auction house must be incredibly successful, though he doesn't know much about them beyond that. After finally finishing Sylvie's bath, Arthur is drying her off on his bed when his family walks in and announces it's his turn to get cleaned up. Since he hadn't bothered much with his looks during his time in the Elf Kingdom, his mother drags him to her hairdresser, who guarantees he'll leave looking amazing. A few hours later, he doesn't look all that different. Just a bit of his hair has been trimmed, but everyone insists he now looks incredibly stylish. Arthur asks why everyone suddenly seems so interested in how he looks, and Tabitha responds by saying she had been considering giving him a tour of their auction house. However, since the Helstia auction house is highly prestigious and even receives visits from members of the royal family, they couldn't possibly let him enter with his hair looking the way it did. Since they're already in Xyrus City, Tabitha suggests giving Arthur a tour, and Elena immediately chimes in, excited to join so she can spend time with her older brother. Lilia feels a twinge of jealousy. After all, before Arthur returned, Elena used to spend most of her time with her, but Lilia also wants to be around Arthur, so she tries not to let it bother her too much. The group enjoys the whole day together, even stopping to play ring toss around a nearby statue. But some random guys suddenly hurl a ring straight at his head before casually walking away. Arthur turns to Lilia and asks if she has any idea what that was about, since those guys were acting ridiculously rude for no reason. She clarifies that those were students from Xyrus Academy, and they behave that way because, in that uniform, nearly everyone in town treats them like royalty. Arthur feels let down, as he hadn't expected to encounter arrogant academy kids here, but he chooses to overlook it for the time being. A short time later, Arthur detects some intriguing energy emanating from a shop, so he heads over to investigate, and his parents clarify that the store deals in beast cores. Arthur is astonished, as he was unaware that beast cores could be bought, having never witnessed such a thing in the Elf Kingdom, though it's quite typical here in the Human Kingdom. Tabitha had mentioned that beast cores can boost a mage's power, and if one contains a beast will, its price can go as high as 100 gold coins. To give some context, that amount of money could support Arthur's family in comfort for the next 250 years. She goes on to say that the auction house will be selling some beast cores later, so if he'd like, she could let him handle one. Arthur thanks her for the kind gesture, but he isn't too eager since he's already content with the beast core Sylvia gave him. Just then, Lilia chimes in and asks her mother if she can have a beast core, but Tabitha promptly refuses, explaining that simply owning a beast core won't help her awaken as a sorcerer. Besides, she believes it's far too costly for someone Lilia's age. Despite Lilia's continued attempts to persuade her, Tabitha stands her ground and says the discussion is over. They then head to a cafe for lunch, but Arthur can clearly see that Lilia is still very upset about what happened. From what was said earlier, it's obvious to him that Tabitha doesn't want Lilia to rush her awakening. Still, for some reason, Lilia seems unusually impatient. Arthur is just about to ask her what's going on when he suddenly realizes that Lilia has disappeared. She's already started walking into a dark alleyway. Arthur stands up and follows her, eventually finding Lilia inside a magic store. She's examining one of the less expensive beast cores, and with her saved allowance, she could actually purchase it herself. But Arthur questions her, asking if she's certain about this. After all, just having a beast core won't guarantee that she'll suddenly be able to wield magic. But Lilia insists she won't know for certain unless she tries. She reaches for the beast core, but Arthur quickly takes hold of her hand, urging her to wait. He really doesn't think it's the right move. Yet Lilia refuses to listen to him, frustrated that he could never truly understand how she feels, not when he's already so naturally gifted. She steps back from Arthur, but in doing so, she unintentionally collides with a boy behind her, revealed to be the same Xyrus Academy students from before. She offers an apology for the bump, but the boy's ego is too puffed up to see it as a simple mistake, so the group gears up to pick a fight. Hearing the disturbance, the store owner steps out to investigate, but the moment he spots the Xyrus Academy uniforms, he decides he wants no part in dealing with those troublemakers. Without a word, he turns around and retreats into his office, pretending he saw nothing. Now the boys are free to do as they please, and their first thought is to teach Arthur and Lilia a lesson by burning them. Lilia quickly ducks behind Arthur for protection. Arthur would prefer to settle things peacefully, but given how unreasonable these guys seem, he braces himself to teach them a lesson instead. But just as the fight is about to break out, Tabitha and Alice arrive, ordering everyone to dismiss their magic at once. The boys, however, brush off Tabitha's warning, asking if she really believes she can stop them. Even the shopkeeper rushes out, pleading with Tabitha not to provoke the boys. After all, if they wanted to, they could easily reduce the entire shop to rubble. However, Tabitha warns them that even Academy students won't escape consequences if they dare lay a finger on the Helstia family's daughter. The moment the boys realize Lilia is a Helstia, they panic. After all, her family is one of the Academy's biggest benefactors, and expulsion would be guaranteed if the director learned of this. So, they start to depart without further trouble, but not before insulting Lilia by calling her an incompetent. Upon returning home, they immediately tell Vincent about the incident. He's stunned to hear that Arthur and Lilia almost came to blows with Academy students, though thankfully, Tabitha intervened before things escalated too far. Vincent realizes with a chill that if she hadn't stepped in, Arthur might have gone far enough to kill those boys. Lilia apologizes for causing so much trouble, but Vincent tells her it's nothing to worry about. She didn't do anything wrong, and with all the donations he has made to the Academy, an incident like this won't affect her chances of enrolling. He also tells Arthur that the same applies to him, but Lilia feels so insecure that she assumes her father is suggesting Arthur should enroll in the Academy in her place. Her parents try to comfort her, insisting that's not what they meant, but Lilia, seeing herself as a failure for not being able to use magic, believes they must see her the same way. She shouts that she hates them both and runs off, leaving her parents completely baffled. A few hours later, when it's time for dinner, Arthur heads to call Lilia down, only to discover she isn't in her room. Back when Lilia was younger, Vincent used to tell her stories about the Academy, which filled her with excitement, and that eagerness made her impatient. Still, she couldn't enroll until she awakened her mana, and that's taken much longer than anyone anticipated. Her parents constantly reassured her that there was no reason to hurry, but when she saw Arthur already mastering magic at such a young age, it left her feeling worthless. Eventually, Arthur finds her alone in the maid break room, and though he wants to apologize, he hesitates, worried that his words might come across as condescending. Unsure of the right way to handle the situation, he struggles with how to approach her. However, before Arthur could say anything, Lilia apologizes for being jealous of him. After Arthur demonstrated his power, he earned all of her father's attention, but she doesn't blame him because it's her own fault for being so incompetent. She really thinks her parents are disappointed in her, and Arthur understands the feelings of self-doubt that must be racing through her mind, so he takes her face in his hands and assures her she's not a failure. He can see how much effort she's put in, and he knows her parents recognize it too. Arthur is certain they're incredibly proud of her, and some unusual exception like him appearing doesn't change that. Lilia lets out a laugh, finally seeing how ridiculous she'd been acting. Her father wants her to become a sorcerer so she can be happy, which is why he has been donating so much money to ensure that she gets enrolled at the Academy. She understands that her parents don't want her to push herself too hard, but the more Vincent does to secure Lilia's position, the more others will look down on her as a spoiled child. Wanting to help her, Arthur asks if she truly wishes to wield magic, because if that's the case, he knows a way to accelerate the process. Later that evening, Arthur informs Lilia's parents that she's gone out, catching them completely by surprise. Confused, they press him for an explanation. Arthur tells them that he sent Lilia to do some training so she can awaken her magic, but in case they are worried, he assures them that the people he sent Lilia to are really nice. Vincent and Tabitha ask him why he would send Lilia away without getting their permission first, but Arthur tells them Lilia is the one who wanted it to be this way. Had she spoken to her parents before leaving, Lilia's determination might have faltered. Still, she made sure to write them a letter, which Arthur now passes to Vincent. In it, she confesses how worthless she's felt all this time without magic, and swears that no matter how many years it takes, she'll train relentlessly until she becomes a truly powerful sorcerer. However, until then she isn't going to return home, so she tells her parents to take care of themselves. Vincent falls to his knees in despair because he realizes this is all his fault. He is the one who reinforced the idea that Lilia needed to become a mage to be happy. In truth, whether she can use magic or not, she will always be his daughter, so he could never think of her as useless. After Vincent finishes speaking, Arthur turns to Lilia and says it's time to step out, and to Vincent's shock, she had been concealed behind the door the whole time. Arthur then begins by expressing his regret for deceiving them. He understands how crushing it feels to believe your child has vanished without warning, and he sincerely apologizes for making them endure that fear. But his intention was to show Lilia that her parents would care for her no matter what, even if she couldn't use magic. Vincent gets why Arthur went to such lengths, so he isn't angry. In fact, it makes him see just how mistaken he had been. He walks over to Reynold and Alice and says he's sorry for pushing to send Arthur back to the academy right after he finally came home. He also feels the need to say sorry to Lilia for almost pressuring her into becoming a sorcerer. He assures her that attending the academy isn't necessary. She doesn't have to master magic to find happiness, and the choice is entirely hers. Lilia is grateful for his words, but she responds that she still wishes to go to the academy, even if her magic takes longer to awaken. She explains that her dream is to become a sorceress who uses her powers to bring joy to others. Arthur tells her that if she's certain this is what she truly wants, he's willing to awaken her magic himself. And since he's going to unlock Lilia's mana, he figures he might as well do the same for Elena while he's at it. The two girls take their seats in the center of the room, and Arthur instructs them to begin by closing their eyes, taking deep breaths, and exhaling slowly. This will help them become aware of the mana inside them. Elena picks up on the sensation immediately, but Lilia still doesn't feel anything stirring within her. She starts to worry that maybe she just isn't cut out for magic, but Arthur reassures her she simply needs to keep trying. Then, placing a hand on each of their backs, he gives them a heads up. He's going to activate their mana now, and they might notice a slight warmth spreading through them. Lilia begins to see lights once Arthur finishes. That's the sign her mana has awakened at last. Overwhelmed with joy, she can hardly contain her excitement. Later, Arthur and his family receive an invitation to the Helstia auction house, and they're all struck by how massive and grand the venue appears. Alice begins to feel uneasy, unsure if she's suited for such a high-class event, but Tabitha comforts her, saying there's no need to worry and they should simply enjoy the evening. This particular auction has stirred excitement among both adventurers and nobles, as it presents a unique opportunity to purchase rare treasures gathered by Vincent. Among these are items like magical beast cores and lavish foreign statues, which is why the security measures are extremely strict, with Reynold overseeing all the guards on duty. As the auction kicks off, Vincent takes the stage and reveals that they have very special guests in attendance tonight: the royal family of Sapin Kingdom, King Blaine, Queen Priscilla, along with Prince Curtis and Princess Catherine. The crowd erupts in cheers for the royals, leading Arthur to conclude that they must be just and beloved rulers for the people to hold them in such high regard. With the royal family present, Reynold and his guards double their vigilance, ensuring that nothing happens during the event. Meanwhile, within the auction hall, Vincent kicks things off by presenting the first item up for bid. This particular blade was crafted by a renowned artisan, and mana has been infused into it, allowing electricity to surge through its tip. The opening bid for this electrified sword is set at 50 gold coins, but without hesitation, one of the attendees counters with an offer of 51. As the bidding war heats up among the participants, Arthur finds himself wondering whether he could imbue a compatible weapon with an elemental attribute of his own. At that moment, he notices Vincent presenting a pair of masks, which immediately catch Arthur's attention. But his focus shifts when he realizes Sylvie is nowhere to be seen. Initially, he assumes she might be playing with Lilia or Elena, but upon spotting them asleep nearby, he rises from his seat to go search for her. Meanwhile, Sylvie strolls through the corridors of the auction house when, unexpectedly, the sorcerer accompanying the royal family intercepts her. Back at the auction stage, Vincent unveils the next item, an orank lion cub. The moment Prince Curtis lays eyes on it, he turns to his father and insists on having one. As the bidding begins, begins. A king swiftly places an offer of 1,000 gold coins. Naturally, no one dares to challenge the king's bid, so the lion cub is promptly sold to him without any further competition. The king steps onto the stage to claim the kitten, and Vincent asks what he intends to do with it. The king replies that he could tame the creature for himself, but since Curtis has offered to train the beast to the best of his ability, the king plans to entrust it to him instead. Meanwhile, Arthur is searching for Sylvie when a sharp scream echoes from the hallway. Rushing toward the sound, he spots the mage staring at her, and instantly recognizes him as the royal family's escort. Wanting to avoid any unnecessary conflict, Arthur calmly requests that the sorcerer release Sylvie, explaining that she's his mana beast. Disappointed, the sorcerer sighs, having mistaken her for one of the auction's offerings. Sylvie rushes to Arthur's side, and just as Arthur prepares to leave, the sorcerer speaks up, saying he's still interested in his pet. He explains that he's been wanting to acquire a mana beast of his own, so he asks Arthur to hand Sylvie over to him. Arthur gives him a look as if he's an idiot and questions why the sorcerer would ever believe he'd agree to such a thing. Instead of simply acknowledging that Arthur refuses to surrender Sylvie, the sorcerer chooses to unleash flames in his direction, attempting to frighten him, and declares that this command comes from a royal sorcerer. Yet, Arthur doesn't even flinch and calmly starts to walk away. This only serves to infuriate the mage further, prompting him to threaten Arthur's parents as retaliation. Though Arthur might brush off threats aimed at himself, he refuses to let any danger toward his family slide. He spins around, his aura radiating an overwhelming wave of deadly intent, and challenges the mage to repeat those words. But it seems he's overlooked the fact that they're inside Vincent's auction house. His suffocating bloodlust surges outward, engulfing the entire building and instantly shattering every window in sight. While those with mana, like the king, manage to endure the pressure, those without, such as Vincent, collapse instantly under the crushing force. The king moves to check on Vincent, while the royal guards encircle their monarch, assuming the murderous aura must belong to an enemy. The king, however, assures them he can protect himself and orders them to focus on shielding the other guests and apprehending the intruder instead. Arthur quickly grasps the consequences of his actions. While he may have successfully intimidated the royal sorcerer, he also just unleashed complete chaos. He withdraws his bloodlust, but it's too late. Panic has already taken hold. With confusion spreading and no one understanding the situation, Reynolds takes charge, commanding everyone to evacuate immediately while he works to bring order to the mess. Following the incident, after everyone has been safely evacuated, the king requests a private conversation with Reynolds. He wishes to confront Reynolds about his failure to apprehend the culprit, and Reynolds offers an apology. However, the king regretfully informs him that punishment is unavoidable. Reynolds accepts whatever penalty the king deems appropriate, but before the king can deliver his decision, the sorcerer intervenes. The mage urges the king to show leniency, pointing out that no lives were lost in the ordeal. However, the sorcerer isn't acting out of pure kindness, and he makes that evident by remarking on how impressive Arthur's mana beast appears. The king proceeds to introduce Sebastian to everyone, explaining that he is a mage tasked with protecting the royal family. Having saved the king's life on numerous occasions, Sebastian has earned the king's deep respect. So, when Sebastian expresses his interest in Arthur's mana beast, the king turns to Reynolds and asks if he would be willing to hand it over as a gesture of gratitude for Sebastian's earlier leniency. Arthur attempts to speak, but his mother quickly interrupts him, reminding him that it's disrespectful to speak out of turn to a king. In response to the king's request, Reynolds speaks up, explaining that he cannot comply because Arthur acquired Sylvie on his own, and thus Reynolds has no authority to hand her over to someone else. At that moment, the king chooses to address Arthur directly. Facing him, he asks if Arthur would consider giving Sylvie to Sebastian, but Arthur refuses, stating that nothing could ever replace Sylvie. The king then suggests a trade, offering the world lion cub he recently obtained in exchange for Sylvie. He insists that although Arthur's mana beast may be rare, the lion cub cub should be considered more valuable. Still, Arthur declines his offer once more and making it clear that he has no intention of selling or trading Sylvie under any circumstances. The king begins to lose his patience and reminds Arthur that he has already asked him twice, insisting that a king should not have to repeat himself. He makes one final request for Arthur to hand over Sylvie, but the king's persistence starts to irritate Arthur. Rising to his feet, Arthur asks the king if he himself would be willing to sell his own children. Hearing this stuns the king so much that he doesn't know what to say, but Arthur continues and reminds the king that he has already turned down his request 3 times already. Yet he refuses to accept that some things are so precious that they aren't for sale, so he wants to know how the king would respond if someone came up to him and demanded to buy his children. The guards rush forward at once to strike Arthur for showing disrespect to the king, but Arthur effortlessly knocks them both out with a single punch. Sebastian starts calling them fools for not managing to kill one small child, and he is determined to obtain Sylvie no matter what. To that end, he casts a spell, hoping to burn Arthur to death. Yet, Arthur triggers his ultimate ability, freezing time throughout the entire room, except for Sebastian. Sebastian looks around in confusion, wondering why everyone has suddenly frozen, but Arthur informs him that none of them can hear anything he says. Arthur then starts to approach him slowly, and in a panic, Sebastian warns him to stay away, claiming that Arthur has no chance against a royal sorcerer. In response, Arthur calmly breaks one of Sebastian's legs. He starts calling out for help, but Arthur tells him no one can save him here, so he had better listen to what Arthur has to say while he is still conscious. Arthur warns him to know his place and be careful about who he threatens, because next time things will be much worse for him. A few seconds later, time returns to normal and Arthur passes out from all the exertion. A short time afterward, Arthur wakes up in his bed with a pounding headache, realizing he might have pushed himself too far by using his ability. Though he managed to freeze time for a brief moment, the strain on his body was immense. Just as he's processing this, Alice enters to check on him, relieved to see he's finally awake. Arthur asks her to fill him in on what happened after he lost consciousness, and Alice explains that everyone was stunned when he collapsed suddenly. She hurried to treat him, but even so, his body took a long time to recover. Now that Arthur appears to be doing well, Alice takes him into town to go shopping after their talk. As they walk through the streets, Arthur notices a hairpin that would suit Elena perfectly, but since he still has no money, Alice purchases it for him, suggesting he give it to Elena as a present later. She even offers to buy something for Arthur too, but he hesitates, wondering if they should really be spending money, especially since Reynolds may have lost his job at the auction house. However, Alice tells him he doesn't have to worry about their family's finances because she has a job as well. Arthur had no idea of this, but apparently Alice makes luxury items and they are quite popular among the nobility, so she makes a decent amount of profit, so they can still afford to buy whatever they want. So much so that by the time their shopping trip is over, Arthur and Alice are carrying a bunch of bags. When they arrive back home, they overhear Reynolds in the living room speaking with someone, firmly stating that his silence isn't for sale when his son was almost killed. Arthur steps in and asks what's going on, and as soon as Reynolds sees him, he expresses his relief that Arthur is up and about. Arthur reassures him there's no need to be so worried, as he's completely fine. The man Reynolds had been speaking to suddenly recognizes Arthur as the boy from the incident and invites him to join their conversation. The man hands Arthur and Reynolds a pouch of gold from the king, calling it a modest apology for what he describes as yesterday's minor incident. Arthur disagrees. Being assaulted by 2 knights and a royal sorcerer hardly feels minor, but he chooses to remain quiet, thanking the man for making the trip. Pleased by Arthur's response, the man smiles and reassures him that the 2 guards involved in the attack have already been fired. After all, he explains, the king would never condone harming a child over something as trivial as a declined request. Reynolds believes that simply firing the knights who attempted to murder his son isn't a sufficient punishment, but the man counters by reminding him that Arthur was disrespectful to the king in the first place. Moreover, the king showed mercy by forgiving Reynolds' failure to protect the auction house, so he shouldn't begrudge the guards receiving a bit of mercy too. Just as Reynold opens his mouth to respond, Arthur interrupts, insisting there's no reason to be angry. After all, it was his own fault for speaking improperly, and since he escaped without serious harm, it doesn't trouble him. Arthur asks about Sebastian's condition, since his leg was broken. The man clarifies that Sebastian was relieved from his position for assaulting Arthur, and is currently undergoing treatment in a hospital. Sebastian kept claiming that Arthur was responsible for his broken leg, but that seemed ridiculous. After all, no one witnessed Arthur doing it, and they had been watching him the whole time. Instead, the king thinks Sebastian's own spell must have rebounded, accidentally shattering his leg. The king is deeply distressed that such an incident occurred, which is why he's making such an effort to offer an apology. The man admits that Arthur is a skilled and naturally gifted young man, but he also cautions him to watch his words when dealing with those in authority. After all, not everyone is as lenient as the king. Arthur and Reynold graciously accept the apology, and once the man departs, Reynold gives every last coin to Arthur. Arthur questions whether Reynold is certain about handing over the money, but Reynold insists it's only right. After all, Arthur was the one who endured the real risk. Not to mention, he'll need funds if he intends to accomplish anything in the days ahead. The events of the day have been a stark reminder for Arthur, though he may have once ruled as a king in his past life. Here, he's still just a powerless child. If he wants to stand against political influence, he'll have to gain some of his own. To achieve that goal, the very next morning, he heads straight to the Magic Academy. However, the moment he arrives, he notices an owl. The creature takes flight, and Arthur immediately pursues it, only to realize that it's a trap. Once he's far enough away, he meets an old woman, and she's been waiting for him. As the head of Xyrus Magic Academy, she occupies a position of great prestige. Her influence reaches across many realms, which is why few have the opportunity to meet her in this manner. From Vincent, the director has received numerous positive reports about Arthur, though she isn't the type to take rumors at face value. To determine whether Arthur truly deserves his reputation, she intends to put him to the test. First, she attempts to intimidate him with her overwhelming magical energy, yet Arthur stands firm, unshaken. Still, even though he manages to endure it, he acknowledges that the director's strength is genuinely terrifying, but that's only natural when confronting the individual who wields the most advanced magic in the entire nation. He intends to demonstrate his true potential, proving that Vincent's praise of his skills was no exaggeration. To start, he envelops himself in wind magic. At the same time, he manipulates earth magic to lift several rocks from the ground. Then, using the wind to accelerate their speed, he hurls the rocks toward the director, only for her to effortlessly deflect them with a single hand. In the next moment, Arthur summons multiple flaming knives behind the director's back. Yet, before even a single one can strike, she effortlessly scatters them all with a burst of wind magic. Stunned by how casually she counters every attack, Arthur's frustration grows, leading him to recklessly rush forward. But before he can close the distance, a powerful gust of wind erupts from the director, sending him tumbling backward. Arthur crashes to the ground, the outcome undeniable. In his current state, defeating the director was never within his reach. Yet despite his loss, the director isn't displeased with how he fought. She acknowledges his remarkable talent, but points out his tendency to overestimate himself, which led him to believe he could overpower her. To truly show him the extent of her strength, the director declares that Arthur's final trial will be simply remaining conscious after enduring her next strike. With both arms raised, she releases a devastating pulse of sound magic directly at him. The force is overwhelming. Nearby boulders fracture instantly, and Arthur's ears ring violently, pushed to their very limit. Yet Arthur grits his teeth and holds his ground, refusing to fall even as the assault continues. The director finds herself genuinely amazed by his stubborn endurance, so much so that she considers personally mentoring him. But before accepting, Arthur has some terms of his own to lay out. He approached her solely because she holds the power and influence necessary to protect his loved ones. He tells her that if she can guarantee the safety of his family and friends, he'll agree to join the academy and submit to her guidance. The director is taken aback by Arthur's boldness, as the offer clearly favors him. However, Arthur is confident in his own value, and the director can't deny it. Knowing students with his talent are rare, just as the director is ready to accept his terms, Arthur brings up one final condition. He explains to the director that he'll only enroll once he meets the official age requirement, as he prefers to be around peers his own age. The director questions his decision, pointing out that this would push back his enrollment by 3 full years. However, Arthur responds by saying he intends to live his life to the absolute fullest. To achieve that, his goal is to become an adventurer and journey across the entire continent. The director can see that Arthur is unwavering in his decision, so she knows there's no chance of persuading him otherwise. She asks whether he's already discussed this choice with his parents, but Arthur admits he still needs to go home and talk to them first. The director then tells him that if he can secure his parents' approval, she'll accept all of his conditions. However, the moment Arthur arrives home and announces his plan to become an adventurer, Alice shuts it down immediately, refusing to allow it. Reynolds pleads with her to at least hear Arthur out, but Alice refuses. Arthur has only just returned after being away for years, and she can't bear the thought of losing him again. Reynolds tries to ease the tension by suggesting a compromise. What if Arthur had a guardian to accompany him on his travels? Still, Alice isn't willing to accept. That's when Arthur steps in, assuring her that he won't be gone nearly as long as he was before. Arthur explains that his adventures will only take him away for short periods, allowing him to return home every few months to see them. This reassurance makes Alice relax slightly. Plus, Arthur clarifies that he doesn't plan to leave right away. He still wants to spend more time enjoying life at home before leaving, but he also feels the need to travel across the Decathan continent, as there's still so much he doesn't fully understand. Besides, staying here and training alone for years would be incredibly boring. He wants a chance to put his skills to the test in real situations. Alice isn't as against the idea of Arthur adventuring now, but her concern hasn't completely faded. She makes him swear that he won't hide anything from her. Arthur agrees to be totally open with her, though deep down, he knows there are plenty of things he'll still have to keep from his family. Moving forward, Reynolds still believes having a guardian for Arthur is a smart move, given how risky adventuring can be, so he reaches out to his friends to see if any of them would be willing to take on the responsibility. Unfortunately, he doesn't have much to offer in terms of payment, but he assures them that he'll find another way to repay their kindness. However, the members of Twin Horn tell him not to worry about money. They're all friends, and they'd be more than happy to give up some of their time to support Arthur. However, Adam immediately refuses. He despises babysitting duties, and he's genuinely concerned that he and Arthur might fight, so much so that Arthur could end up killing him one night. The others nod in agreement, admitting it's a terrible idea since Adam is so irritating that Arthur might actually be tempted to kill him. At that moment, Jasmine lifts her hand and volunteers for the job instead. Everyone is caught off guard by this, especially since they all know Jasmine dislikes protection jobs even more than Adam does. But she says that if it's for Arthur, she's willing to take it on. Reynolds is thankful for her offer, and with that, the decision is made. Like Arthur, Jasmine is an augmenter, and she's recently advanced to the light orange stage. On top of that, she gets along great with Arthur, making her an ideal choice for a role like this. Now that Arthur's guardian has been chosen, Arthur asks Reynolds if he can stop by the auction house because he still needs to pick out a sword, and Reynolds has no problem with it, so he puts in a request with Vincent. The following day, Arthur meets with Vincent and explains that he needs a sword for his adventurer admissions test. Vincent tells him he's welcome to browse as much as he wants. With so many swords in Vincent's collection, it's clear it'll take a while to go through them all. By the time dinner rolls around, Arthur still hasn't returned. Alice begins to grow anxious and considers whether she should go search for Arthur. Reynolds reassures her that selecting the right weapon takes time, so it's better to just wait patiently for him to make his choice. Meanwhile, Arthur is deep in frustration. He's examined countless swords by now, yet not a single one has managed to spark his interest. Most sword fighters in this world are augmenters, so the swords available are usually double-handed blades or really big one-handed blades, and that won't work for Arthur since his small body can't handle a weapon like that. Just then, Sylvie gets Arthur's attention and leads him over to a stick she found on the ground. Arthur doesn't understand why Sylvie is so fixated on the staff, but he decides to pick it up anyway. To his surprise, it's much heavier than it appears. He also notices that it feels unbalanced, nothing like a normal staff, as if there's a blade hidden inside. Curious, Arthur tugs on what looks like a handle, trying to draw it. After channeling a bit of mana into it, glowing letters suddenly flash before his eyes, and the sword begins to slide free from its sheath. This is the first time Arthur has seen a sword with a blade like this, so he takes a few practice swings, but it's too heavy for his body to handle naturally. However, even with the weight, the sword's quality is still good enough that Arthur is able to effortlessly cut a barrel in half. While Arthur is inspecting the blade, the sword suddenly zaps his hand, so he accidentally drops it. But when he picks it up again, he immediately notices something different. The weapon now feels perfectly balanced, and its size and shape seem to fit his body flawlessly. Arthur is intrigued, especially since, in his past life as a king, he had owned many exceptional swords, yet none of them had ever felt as tailored to him as this one does. He then decides to try it out on another barrel, and he is easily able to destroy it in one swing. Just then, Vincent and Reynold all walk in because Arthur has been gone for an awfully long time and dinner is starting to get cold. They ask Arthur if he has found the sword that he likes yet, but Arthur hasn't made up his mind yet, so he takes a random sword and says this is his choice. Reynold picks up the sword and, after giving it a quick test, realizes there's nothing particularly special about it. Still, if Arthur insists that this is the one he wants, Vincent tells him he's welcome to take it. At that moment, Vincent spots the staff attached to Arthur's hip and questions him about it. Arthur quickly comes up with an excuse, explaining that it's just an ordinary old staff he came across, and he only intended to use it for a few practice swings since it's clearly not a sword. Vincent, surprised, mentions that he wasn't even aware he had a staff like that in his warehouse, so he instructs Jameson to double-check the inventory. Jameson informs him that an old man just threw the staff at him one day after saying it was worthless. By all appearances, it's just a sturdy staff, and even after taking it to many appraisers, they all told him it was just a regular staff, but it was a cool-looking staff, so Jameson decided to store it in the warehouse. Arthur begs Vincent to let him keep the staff, and since Vincent isn't sure what to do with it himself, he allows Arthur to take it too. Over the next few weeks, Arthur cherishes the moments he shares with his loved ones, all while getting ready for his upcoming journey. Before he even realizes it, Arthur's 9th birthday arrives, a celebration is thrown in his honor, and later, everyone comes together to present him with their gifts. The first present Arthur unwraps is a glove from Alice, embedded with gems infused with healing magic. It's something he can use if he ever gets hurt. Next is Vincent's gift. He presents Arthur with a pair of rings, explaining that they're meant to ease Alice's worries. Essentially, Alice's ring will alert her if Arthur's mana drops to a critical level, it'll glow, signaling that he needs help. The last present comes from Adam, a magical scroll capable of transmitting sound. With it, Arthur can record a message and send it back home, allowing Alice to reply. Grateful, Arthur thanks everyone for the amazing gifts. Since he's set to depart the next day, he makes sure they all know just how much he values everything they've done for him. Alice pleads with him to stay safe while he's away. She tells him it doesn't matter if he becomes powerful or wealthy. All she truly cares about is him coming back unharmed. That evening, Arthur gathers and organizes all his equipment. Though his heart aches at the thought of parting with his family so soon, he's determined to become stronger, to ensure he'll never have to lose them. To achieve that goal, he knows he must seek out new experiences and grow stronger. Once everything is packed and prepared, he makes his way downstairs, where his family gathers for their last farewells. Reynold gives him a firm warning. While Arthur may be skilled, he shouldn't let overconfidence lead him into danger. Yet Reynold also makes sure Arthur understands that through all his travels, the family will be cheering him on without fail. With that, Arthur bids farewell to his mother and father. The moment he steps outside, he finds Jasmine standing there, ready and waiting for him. Arthur begins his path to becoming an adventurer by getting officially registered. He and Jasmine go directly to the Xyrus Adventurers Guild, where Arthur enrolls for the rank assessment exam. Though unfamiliar with a procedure, after signing up, a guild staff member guides him to another room. Seeing Jasmine's expression, Arthur feels optimistic about how things are progressing. Arthur wears a mask as an adventurer to avoid making enemies who might later target his family. He also doesn't want his family's reputation to affect his rank evaluation. However, since Jasmine isn't a class adventurer, her influence could still play a role. The two are introduced to Caspian Bladeheart, the guild leader, who explains to Arthur that he would normally need to pass a written test and have his mana core evaluated before the official rank assessment. However, because Jasmine is vouching for him, and Caspian is well acquainted with her father, he's willing to make an exception. Since Arthur is is hiding his identity behind a mask. Caspian says he doesn't need to use his real name for the registration, but he will need to come up with an alias. Arthur then chooses Note as his official adventurer name. Once everything is arranged, Caspian instructs Arthur and Jasmine to follow him to the arena for the assessment. On the way, Arthur questions Jasmine about her relationship with the guild master, noting how helpful he's been. Jasmine admits she's familiar with Caspian, but clarifies that it's actually her father who has strong ties to the guild, not her. Upon reaching the assessment arena, the doors swing open to reveal an ongoing battle between two mages, Diane, a young water mage, and her instructor midway through her evaluation exam. Arthur watches as their clash unfolds before him. Diane launches a blast of water at the instructor, but he effortlessly counters it and disappears in a cloud of steam. Before she can react, he suddenly reappears behind her and taps her on the head. While he commends Diane's impressive casting speed, he notes that her defense is severely lacking, placing her in the C-class rank. Diane looks thrilled with the result, and Jasmine explains that earning a C-class at her age is a notable achievement for a mage. Next is a boy named Elijah Knight, but before he can even start, the instructors ask him to hold on for a moment. After a quick discussion among themselves, they decide to let him skip the exam entirely and declare him a B-class adventurer. The unexpected announcement stuns everyone watching, including Jasmine and Arthur, but since there's no valid reason to object, the evaluations proceed as planned. The next examinee is an arrogant young boy named Lucas Wykes. Though his haughty attitude irritates the instructor, she can't ignore his remarkable talent. Despite being only 11 years old, he's already reached the light orange stage in his monocore, a nearly impossible feat for his age. Arthur observes Lucas's pointed ears, which remind him of Tesha, leading him to conclude the boy must be an elf. However, it's unusual to encounter an elf in the heart of a human kingdom. The moment the exam starts, Lucas raises his staff and chants, summoning a flaming guardian to assault the instructor. Yet, with a single earth spell, she shatters it effortlessly. Lucas dashes up a rock pillar, slams his staff down, and unleashes a massive firestorm into the air, but the spell is so powerful that he can't control it. In a matter of seconds, Lucas loses control of his flames and almost ends up getting caught in his own explosion. The instructor quickly steps in, using her earth magic to snuff out the fire. When it's all over, Lucas is unharmed, but in the process his ego was hurt. The instructor compliments Lucas on his impressive power. However, Lucas is too bitter about his loss to pay attention to any of her feedback, and in a fit of frustration, he suddenly attempts to launch a surprise attack while she's still explaining his mistakes. Luckily, Arthur quickly drops his sword to deflect the spell, and the instructor realizes that Lucas is a hopeless case with no sense of responsibility. She gives him a B rank, seeing his complete lack of self-discipline. Lucas erupts in anger, shouting about getting his father involved, but the instructor just grabs him by the collar and hauls him out of the arena. Now it's Arthur's turn for evaluation, and he steps forward, deciding to stop holding back. He finally takes the test seriously. The sheer intensity of his aura is so overwhelming that the instructor immediately shifts into a defensive stance. At that moment, Caspian steps into the arena and announces that he'll be handling Arthur's assessment himself. The instructor hesitantly questions if that's appropriate, pointing out that having a double-a-class adventurer like Caspian is a bit excessive for a simple exam. But Caspian reassures him, saying it'll just be a light spar. Caspian turns to Arthur and asks if he's alright with the arrangement. Arthur hadn't anticipated facing one of the guild's top fighters that day, but he's excited for the challenge. After the shortened match, Arthur is officially registered as a B-rank adventurer, marking the beginning of his journey and the start of a new chapter in his life. Meanwhile, the two instructors head to Caspian's office and question him about the unusually high number of B-rank adventurers this year, especially since they're all children. Caspian calmly explains that 6 months ago, a youth cultural exchange occurred. Though it wasn't publicly announced, some children from other races were granted official certifications, permitting them to become adventurers in Sapin. Lucas Wykes falls into this category. His half-elf heritage is obvious. Despite his rule breaking, the Wykes family's clout might eventually secure him a promotion. However, since the Wykes lineage is purely human, it's probable that Lucas was born to an enslaved elf. As for Elijah Knight, the instructors weren't given any details about him, and he was promoted to B class without taking the test. However, that's only because he has a powerful connection vouching for his abilities, so Caspian's hands are tied and there's nothing he can do about it. The instructors ask who's backing Elijah, and Caspian explains that Elijah is a human raised in the dwarf kingdom. He was sent as a representative to get used to living among humans, but the guild has limited authority when it comes to dealing with him. Arthur was the last among the examinees, and the instructors still find it puzzling that Caspian insisted on evaluating him personally. Yet the truth is, Caspian knows nothing about Arthur, not even his real identity. The only thing he's sure of is that Arthur doesn't represent any of the kingdoms. Still, Caspian suspects that Arthur must have some influential ties, given that his guardian is the daughter of the renowned Flamesworth family. On top of that, the way Arthur handles a sword is reminiscent of a seasoned master. Caspian was genuinely impressed, sensing that Arthur has the potential to become incredibly powerful someday, but for now, Caspian still surpasses him in strength. As Arthur and Jasmine head out of the guild, Arthur comes to a realization. He's grown too absorbed in mastering the magical abilities of this world. In devoting so much time to his magic training, he's neglected his sword practice, and as a result, his swordsmanship has started to slip. At that moment, Arthur accidentally collides with Elijah. After Arthur apologizes for the mishap, Elijah scolds him for recklessly interfering in another person's match, warning that such actions could make him a target. However, Elijah concedes that he would have acted the same way in Arthur's position. As Elijah and Arthur converse, Lucas suddenly interrupts and joins their discussion. Arthur tells him to back off because he wants nothing to do with troublemakers like Lucas. Lucas seizes Arthur by the collar and threatens to teach him a lesson. However, since all three of them were promoted to B rank, a lot of the adventurers in the guild are paying attention to them, so Lucas won't get away with starting a fight here. Lucas eventually backs off and walks away, so Jasmine tells Arthur they should get going too, and she has a good idea for their first destination. Jasmine guides Arthur through a gate that opens up to a vast, scenic field known as the Beast Pasture Plains. Although Arthur finds the view stunning, he feels it's a bit too calm for his taste. Jasmine explains that this area is mainly used by beginner adventurers to train and collect supplies for their missions. However, she adds that this isn't where they're actually headed. She urges Arthur to keep up, warning him that reaching their true destination will require a full day of running. Arthur is a bit surprised by just how fast Jasmine truly is, since he never fully grasped what it meant to be a rank adventurer. He had a similar experience during his assessment fight against Caspian. Despite knowing that Caspian was a double A rank, Arthur still thought he had a chance to win, but Caspian effortlessly countered all of his moves, and ever since then, Arthur has been reconsidering how overconfident he was. Suddenly, a loud crash echoes through the forest, and moments later, a raging wild boar bursts from the trees. The enraged monster charges at the nearby adventurers, even devouring one in its path. Spotting the danger, Jasmine immediately grabs Arthur and urges him to flee. A boar monster like that has no business being near the beast pasture. Its sudden appearance can only mean something has gone terribly wrong. After putting some distance between themselves and the boar, Arthur and Jasmine stumble upon a wrecked carriage in the middle of the plains. Jasmine deduces that some reckless adventurers must have captured the beast alive for transport before it escaped and went wild. Though her theory makes sense, Arthur isn't sure why anyone would ever try to capture such a dangerous creature in the first place. The boar eventually spots Arthur and Jasmine, so it charges right at them, and the two are forced to jump out of the way. It then tries to stab him with its unusually long tongue, but they manage to dodge again. But the situation quickly becomes too dangerous, prompting Jasmine to tell Arthur to run while she handles it. She dashes toward the boar, enhancing her speed with wind magic as she strikes it with her blade. She lands a few solid blows, but as she leaps onto a nearby tree, the boar charges after her and nearly crushes her. Jasmine dives out of the way, but she loses her balance in the process, so Arthur jumps up to catch her before she gets hurt. Jasmine thanks Arthur for saving her, but there are still a lot of newbie adventurers in the boar's line of sight, so Jasmine gets back up and rushes to defend them. As the boar prepares to charge, Arthur feels the urge to jump in and help, but his instincts from his past life remind him to hold back. He's already made the mistake of overestimating himself once today, so this time, he decides to stay calm and wait for the perfect moment to make his move. As the boar charges, Arthur waits until its attention is fully fixed on Jasmine. Seizing the moment, he dashes forward, envelops his sword in flames, and swiftly strikes the beast down. Thanks to Arthur's skill, no one is harmed. But Jasmine can't shake a twinge of regret. She had hoped to fulfill her role as his guardian, yet he was the one who saved her instead. Jasmine first became an adventurer because she wanted to escape from her family, the Flamesworths. For generations, her family had produced powerful mages and held fire magic in the highest regard. In the beginning, Jasmine felt proud to belong to such an exceptional family, and because she awakened her mana at a young age, her parents placed high expectations on her. But everything changed when they discovered she could only use wind magic instead of fire. They rejected her and called her a disgrace. Arthur stands and yells that her family's beliefs are nonsense. No element is inherently superior to another, but as soon as the words leave his mouth, Jasmine erupts into laughter. She quickly apologizes, amused by how heated he became over the issue, especially since he's usually so composed. Arthur got so upset because, in his past life, he was always told he was worthless, just like what Jasmine went through. What her family did to her was undeniably harsh, but if they hadn't abandoned her, she never would have met the twin horns. Initially, Jasmine struggled with teamwork and trusting others in battle, but gradually, she formed strong bonds with her teammates, learning invaluable lessons from them. Even now, she occasionally gets reprimanded for mistakes, but she recognizes how much she's grown because of them. Sometimes, she even wonders if Arthur has undergone a similar situation. Arthur doubts whether someone with his past can truly change, but as he reflects on his journey since being reborn, on all he's experienced, and the people he's come to care for, he resolves to keep growing. For their sake, he'll strive to be better and become someone worthy of protecting them. Arthur and Jasmine set off on their journey together, and after reaching a certain point along the way, they step down from the carriage and go over the details of their mission together. Arthur goes over everything again, confirming that all contact with nearby village has been completely cut off, and that they have been asked to go in and look into what happened. He makes it clear that their top priority for this entire mission is to stay alive, and since the quest description did not mention slaying anything at all, if they happen to come across a dangerous beast along the way, there is absolutely no need for them to get personally involved with it. Arthur then turns to Sylvie, who is sitting perched on his shoulder, and asks her what she plans to do while he is away handling the mission. Sylvie simply tells him that she will just be training somewhere nearby while he is gone, so Arthur tells her he will make sure to let her know the moment he gets back. With that settled, Arthur and Jasmine begin heading toward the village, but after walking for a little, while they both notice that there are a lot of footprints leading into the village, but very few tracks coming back out the other way. They both understand that with the current situation being what it is, their best move right now is to gather as much information as they can, so they start carefully scouting the surrounding area and peer through the bushes to try and get a better sense of what is actually going on in there. After looking around for a good while, they see absolutely no signs of any people anywhere, which makes Arthur start to wonder whether a beast had come and attacked them all. But Jasmine is not so sure that is the case, since there are no visible signs of any kind of struggle anywhere around them. They then suddenly pick up a strange aura coming from somewhere inside the village, and they both decide to head in and check it out for themselves. Once inside, they find several glowing cyan crystals sticking up out of the ground in different spots. But when they get in closer for a better look, they are shocked to realize that there are actually people trapped inside each one of them, which leaves them both standing there completely confused. What confuses them even further is when they come across a girl who does not appear to have been affected by the crystal entrapment at all. They stop and question her about what happened, and she explains that she had been out in the area gathering medicinal herbs when everything went wrong, and that she only just got back to find everyone she knows in this state. The girl completely breaks down in tears at the sight of all her friends and family trapped and frozen inside those crystals. However, from all the information they have been able to gather so far, Arthur can tell that this is without a doubt the work of some kind of beast. Just then, a spider web suddenly shoots out and sticks onto the girl's leg, and she gets dragged off the ground and lifted into the air as a giant spider beast closes in and prepares to eat her whole. Arthur sees this happening and immediately moves to go save her, but Jasmine reaches out and stops him before he can. The spider then seals the girl away inside one of the crystals and drops slaps her back down. It then turns its full attention toward Arthur and Jasmine and tries to catch them as well, but the two of them are easily able to dodge out of its way, and shortly after that they make the decision to turn around and run since their quest description never included taking down any beasts in the first place. At the exact same time, two figures dressed in hooded cloaks stand together in a dark room with a map laid out between them and talk about the three-way alliance between the humans, the dwarves, and the elves, which they both consider to be a far less than ideal arrangement from where the two of them currently stand. However, one of them thinks that all events have a certain natural flow to them, and that sometimes simply going along with that flow can turn out to be a very pleasant thing. He then uses a beast glade on the map, which causes a glowing green energy ball to appear over it. The most powerful and threatening adventurers then appear on the map in miniature form, and looking at what they see, the two of them agree that this particular future is something they are going to have to prevent at absolutely all costs. But even just from the way they react to each figure, you can tell that the ones they are most worried about by far are Arthur and Jasmine. Meanwhile, Arthur and Jasmine manage to get away from the spider beast, and Arthur is still completely puzzled as to what that thing even was. Jasmine explains to him that the beast is known as an arachne, and that it is one of the top 5 beasts she has always hoped she would never have to come face to face with. She tells him she has only ever gone up against 5 of them in her entire life and only managed to kill a single one, and even that took the full lineup of the twin horns working together, which leaves Arthur genuinely shocked to hear. She goes on to add that Reynold and Alice were both there for that fight, and that Alice ended up being absolutely crucial to them pulling through because of her emitter powers. An arachne's curse can only ever be broken by an emitter or by killing the arachne itself. On top of that, arachnes have a very high resistance to spells, which means most magic does not even make a dent in them. Hearing all of this, Arthur now understands exactly why Jasmine pulled him back earlier, because she already knew they had no real way of beating it. Jasmine confirms that and adds that arachnes typically cannot stand daylight, which is why they usually stay buried deep in the forest or deep inside dungeons. With that said, Jasmine acknowledges that up until now she has taught him everything he needs to know about being an adventurer, so she puts it to him and asks what he thinks the best course of action would be right now. Arthur thinks it over for a moment and concludes that the best move is to head straight back to the guild and report everything they found. But just then, the arachne suddenly appears right behind them and uses its trap magic to try and hold them in place and convert them. Jasmine shoves Arthur out of the way at the very last second, leaving herself as the only one inside the magic circle, and not long after that she gets sealed inside a crystal. The arachne then lunges straight at Arthur, but he is able to bring his sword up in time to block it. While holding the block, his mind drifts back to his former life as a king who was considered the strongest there was. That memory is enough to fire him up, and he throws everything he has at the arachne, but just as Jasmine warned him, his swords are simply not strong enough to do any real damage to it. He leaps back onto a tree and takes stock of the situation, accepting that his swords alone are not going to be enough here, so he lets loose his blade and flame technique and comes at it with those magic attacks instead, and they actually appear to be doing some damage this time. At a certain point, Arthur starts to think that was enough to finish it off, but to his surprise, the arachne manages to pull through and recover, which does not completely shock him since Jasmine did warn him about its high magic resistance. With that in mind, Arthur uses his rock arrow technique, which drives several rock spines deep into the arachne's body. It gets irritated and lunges straight at him, but Arthur dodges out of the way and lands on top of it, driving his sword into the gap that the rock spines created. He then activates the rock spines inside its body using his magic, which sends a massive surge of electricity tearing through it. After being electrocuted for a good while, the arachne finally goes down. Arthur climbs off and looks over toward Jasmine, but for some reason she is still trapped inside the crystal. It turns out that is because the arachne is still alive. It turns and looks back at Arthur with its magic eye, but Arthur freezes time before its magic can take effect. As he walks, he quietly thanks the arachne under his breath, because it is only thanks to this fight that he was able to remember how to wield his sword the way he used to in his past life. With that, he calmly raises his sword and slices through the arachne in a single clean motion, killing it instantly. Even so, the toll that technique has taken on his body is clearly written all over him. He knows he still needs to find a way to bring together his old way of fighting and the new magic he has learned in this world. He drops to the ground to catch his breath, but that is when Sylvie rushes over to him and asks what was going on because she sensed a burst of intense anger coming from him a moment ago. Arthur tells her not to worry because he is fine. Jasmine and the others appear to have broken free from the curse, but Jasmine does not look even slightly pleased with Arthur. Arthur understands and apologizes to her for going ahead and fighting the Arak even after she had told him not to. Hearing that, Jasmine decides there is no point in staying angry since Arthur has already owned up to his mistake. Still, she cannot hide the fact that she is genuinely shocked that he was actually able to beat it all on his own. Even so, Arthur tells her that this is not the kind of power he is after. What he wants is the power to protect the people who matter to him. He admits that it was his own weakness that caused him to lose his mom, dad, and Elena, and he knows there is no going back and changing any of that. Because of that, he is determined to get as strong as he possibly can. Jasmine still scolds him for putting his life on the line like that, but Arthur tells her that she matters to him too, and that he would do anything to keep her safe, which makes her blush. Later that day, they head back to the guild and word of Arthur taking down the Arakan spreads fast. Lucas finds it very hard to believe and asks Arthur to produce the mana core as proof, but Arthur realizes that is not going to be possible since Sylvie ate the mana core right after he defeated it. Still, Arthur materializes the Arakan's cursed eye of petrification, and Lucas is left completely speechless at the sight of it because he has never seen one before. Even so, Lucas keeps his pride intact as usual and tells Arthur that this Arakan still would not have been any kind of match for him, and then walks off. With all of that out of the way, Arthur heads back to the family mansion, and his family, Elena especially, is overjoyed to see both him walk back through the door safely. He tells his father Reynolds about how he took down an Arakan, and Reynolds is genuinely impressed. His mother Alice, on the other hand, is far from happy about it and makes Arthur kneel down while reminding him that before he became an adventurer, he made a promise not to do anything dangerous. Arthur points out that staying out of danger is probably not going to be realistic for an adventurer, but his mom does not want to hear it and simply tells him to keep his promise. Reynolds does not make too big a deal out of it and just tells Arthur to follow Jasmine's lead from now on. Jasmine assures him not to worry since she has already flagged everything with the guild. Reynolds then tells Alice to stop crying and try to cheer up a bit because what matters most right now is that Arthur made it back home in one piece. Alice takes that in and pulls herself together, telling Arthur not to put her through that kind of worry again. With everything settled, Arthur and Jasmine head over to the training area and have a no magic combat sparring session. They both go back and forth with their batons for a good while and appear to be very evenly matched throughout. After they are done, they both bow and thank each other for the sparring match. Arthur then looks up at the sky and lets his mind wander, thinking about what Tesha might be up to right now. But the scene then shifts to show Tesha and her crew being chased down by a giant boulder. The next day, Tesha and her party sit in a diner and think about what to do next. After some time, Tesha says their next task is to hunt wild boars. Her party members feel uneasy because the hunt will take place in human territory. They talk about it for a while, then decide to go ahead with the plan and prepare to leave. As Tesha walks out of the diner, an adventurer sticks his leg out to trip her, but she reacts quickly and kicks him away. This causes tension in the diner, and the other adventurers get ready to attack them. Tesha and her group respond by casting a water wall that traps the adventurers inside, giving them time to escape. Soon after, a carriage arrives, and they get in to begin their journey. At first, everything goes smoothly. Then a group of bandits on horses appears and tries to attack the carriage. Tesha and her party fight back and defeat them without much trouble. It is revealed that the relationship between elves, humans, and dwarves has been damaged by many years of conflict. A treaty between the three kingdoms was created to end the fighting. However, the agreement only exists at the level of the kingdoms. The people themselves still carry anger and distrust, so the peace is not truly complete. As Tesha and her party continue their journey, more humans try to capture them. From a distant location, a man in a hood watches everything using a mystic map. Meanwhile, Tesha and the others start to question why they are being attacked so often. They soon realize that elves are highly valuable targets, which is why they are being hunted. Even with this danger, Tesha refuses to give up. She suggests that they continue the rest of the journey on foot instead of using the carriage. As they walk, Faye starts to worry. They think the humans will hate them and chase them away. Even though they are just trying to help. Tesha, however, does not believe this. Soon, they reach a nearby village, but the village chief immediately drives them out just because they are elves. Meanwhile, Arthur sits alone in a diner, watching Lucas. He realizes Lucas's family is the strongest in the Sapien kingdom, which makes it strange that they have elvish blood. At the same time, Lucas goes over to Elijah and teases him, asking what a human has to do with the dwarf royal family. This makes Elijah wonder if Lucas knows something about him. Elijah answers calmly that it is complicated and notes that he noticed Lucas is part elf too. Lucas explains that the Wykes family aims to produce powerful mages. Before he can finish, Arthur interrupts, saying the Wykes family welcomes elves who are good at controlling mana, even if other humans do not approve. Arthur thinks the family is either progressive or ambitious enough to do anything to gain power. Lucas then casts a fireball in his hand. He says he will use his power so no one in the entire Dicathan continent can challenge him as the greatest mage. It is his duty as a Wykes family member. Arthur does not respond much and only wishes him good luck. Lucas is surprised by the casual reply. Arthur explains that they now have different goals, since he does not need to be the strongest anymore, leaving both Elijah and Lucas speechless. Soon after, Jasmine arrives and tells Arthur they have received their next quest. She warns it will be a long journey, but Arthur thinks it sounds fun. Meanwhile, Tesha and her party try to gather information about the mana beasts that have appeared around town. No one will tell them anything. Tesha becomes upset and begins to cry. Faye is not surprised because he knows elves would react the same way if humans came to their territory. Just then, an acorn hits Tesha's head. She looks up and sees some kids through it. She prepares to scold them, but they actually give her useful information. The boar has been coming from the east. This shocks everyone. Meanwhile, the mysterious individuals continue watching Tesha through a magical map. They agree that Tesha herself is not important, but who she will become is crucial, since she is the princess of the Elenwar kingdom. They think removing her will hurt the three-way treaty, so they start preparing an attack against her. Just then, a giant mana beast appears and launches a direct attack at them, but they manage to dodge out of the way at the last second. They all work together and hit it with one attack after another, and after putting in that much effort, they feel certain they must have brought it down, but they are stunned to find out that it is still very much alive. They come at it with their magic again, but this time it has no effect at all, as the boar has adapted and put up a shield to block everything they throw at it. This attack was carefully set up by the hooded individuals, whose plan is to get the three-way treaty torn apart by getting Tesha killed on human territory. Tesha and her group realize their magic is no longer doing anything useful, so they switch to running and dodging as fast as they possibly can. But in the middle of all the chaos, Vaya suddenly takes a hit from a piece of flying debris, which sends her crashing to the ground right in front of the boar. Luckily, Faye is quick enough to use his water magic to pull Vaya out of there and bring her safely over to him before anything worse can happen. Faye suggests that they fall back and retreat, but that is when Tesha comes up with a plan. The first step is for Faye to act as bait, so he goes in and hits the boar with some water magic to get it chasing after him. Then once it is in the right position, Vaya uses her earth magic to open up a hole in the ground beneath it, which swallows the boar and traps it in place. With it stuck down there, Tesha uses her telekinesis to lift up a cluster of rocks and bring them crashing down onto the mana beast, keeping it pinned. Tesha lets out a sigh of relief, thinking it is finally over. But that is when the mana beast forces its way out of the hole and is about to slam straight into Faye and Vaya. Tesha spots it just in time and gets them both out of the way with her wind magic before it can connect. Tesha takes a breath and reflects on what she just did, figuring that getting her teammates to safety was simply the right call in that moment, just like Arthur would have done. The thought of Arthur pulls her into a wave of memories from all the time they spent together, and she gets a little lost in them, but Faye acts quickly and uses his water magic to pull her back to safety before she got hurt. Faye and Vaya suggest they pull back and retreat, but Tesha is still completely set on taking the mana beast down. She realizes she has run completely out of mana and has no way to attack, but then she suddenly remembers a trick Arthur taught her. She steadies herself and begins drawing in mana from everything around her. As the mana beast charges straight toward her, she meets it with a single punch that drops it instantly. Faye and Vaya watch in disbelief, realizing that she was able to pull that off because she used the mana to strengthen her body from the inside. The hooded individuals observe the outcome and come to the conclusion conclusion that Tesha is a great deal stronger than they had anticipated, so they agree to come prepared with a far more powerful mana beast the next time around. With the beast taken care of, Tesha and her group go to report to the village chief and let him know they dealt with it, but the village chief does not even bother to thank them, which clearly irritates Tesha. Faye just tells her not to expect any courtesy from humans and to let it go, but then they spot the kids from earlier and the children thank them for taking care of the boar. Meanwhile, Virion speaks with Cynthia and tells her about how he has been keeping an eye on Tesha and how she came dangerously close to the edge in her fight against the mana beast. Cynthia is not too surprised given that Tesha is Virion's granddaughter after all, but Virion admits that as much as he would like to take credit for her strength, he genuinely believes it comes from the wonderful friends like Arthur who stand by her side. A little while later, Tesha and her group then sit down together at a diner, and Tesha brings up the fact that she and Faye will be heading back to Xyrus soon. They ask Vaya what she plans to do, and Vaya says she will make her way to Xyrus as well since it would be nice to see Arthur again. Tesha is caught completely off guard hearing that and asks how Vaya even knows who Arthur is. Vaya explains that she has been to Xyrus with him before. Tesha had not seen Arthur at all since he left, mostly because she never found out exactly where in Xyrus he had gone. Not long after, Tesha finds herself standing in front of Arthur's family mansion, growing more and more nervous about what she is going to say when she finally sees him. Alice and Elena suddenly come running into her out of nowhere, which sends Tesha into a flustered panic, and she takes off as fast as she can, still trying to figure out where Arthur actually is. Arthur is then seen laying unconscious on the shore of an island. After a while, he slowly stands up and starts to wonder how he even got here in the first place. He begins running across the area, trying to figure out where he is and what direction he should go. While doing this, he suddenly recalls what happened before now. He remembers that he was traveling by canoe with Jasmine, but then they were caught in a massive tsunami that came out of nowhere, and that strong wave caused them to get separated from each other. Arthur recalls this clearly and immediately begins looking everywhere for Jasmine without wasting time. As he keeps moving through the area, he suddenly stumbles upon Lucas and Elijah, who are also laying on the ground, completely drenched in ocean water. Arthur then explains to both of them how he got here, and Lucas and Elijah also begin explaining their own situations in return so they can understand what happened to each other. Arthur explains that he had taken a commission from the Helstia family to capture a mana beast, but during that assignment he was unfortunately caught in a violent storm while traveling. Elijah then explains that he was on a job from the guild because there had been a series of fishing boats disappearing near the farmlands, so he was sent to investigate the cause of those missing boats, and during that investigation he also got caught in the same storm. Lucas does not directly explain how he got here, but both Arthur and Elijah already understand that Lucas is simply too proud to admit that he also got caught in the storm like the rest of them. After that, the three of them begin brainstorming how they are going to get off this island. They all agree and state that it is obvious they are going to need to find or build a new boat in order to leave the place safely. However, Arthur is still more worried about the whereabouts of Jasmine, and he cannot focus fully on escape plans. At the same time, he still has strong confidence that if he was able to survive the storm, then Jasmine definitely survived as well and is somewhere nearby. Arthur then begins speaking telepathically to Sylvie and explains his full situation to her. He tells Sylvie to help him search the sea area and surrounding water regions for any possible sign of Jasmine so they can be reunited faster. At the same time, Jasmine is shown at one end of the shore, far away from Arthur's location. She is calling out loudly for Arthur, but she receives no response at all. After calling for some time, she slowly falls to her knees and begins blaming herself, saying that everything that happened is her fault and that she is the reason they got separated. She then starts thinking back to earlier events and remembers a conversation she had with Reynolds. In that memory, Reynolds had told her that adventurers who go out on jobs often end up facing enemies or dangers that are far stronger than what was originally stated or advertised in the mission details. After hearing that, Jasmine began to assume that the guilds might simply be underestimating the difficulty level of their jobs. Reynolds then explains that this is a possibility, but he also adds another possible explanation, saying that there could be someone or some group actively opposing the three-way treaty and causing these accidents on purpose. Reynolds also knew that this kind of information would not be enough to stop stop Arthur from accepting jobs and continuing his adventures. So instead of trying to discourage him, he simply asks Jasmine to be extra careful whenever she is traveling with Arthur and to always watch over him and keep him safe as much as she can. Jasmine listens to this and promises him that she will do exactly that and stay cautious at all times. She begins looking for Arthur, but then she comes across two of Lucas's guards. Both of them explain to Jasmine how they ended up there, and as they talk, they start crying because they realize they have been completely separated from Lucas. Meanwhile, Lucas uses his dimensional ring to bring out camping equipment. Arthur looks at it in shock because this is the first time he has ever seen a dimensional ring in real life. After that, they set up a tent and create a basic place to sleep. However, they do not have much food available. Because of this, Arthur goes into the forest to gather supplies. He collects fish and mushrooms to use for a meal, then tells Lucas to handle the cooking since he can use fire magic. Lucas agrees and starts cooking. At first, he struggles, either burning the fish or undercooking it, but after some trial and error, he slowly improves and eventually manages to cook a properly grilled fish. With that done, they sit around the campfire and eat their dinner together. As Arthur eats with Lucas and Elijah beside him, the moment reminds him of the time he spent with his family while growing up. It brings back a sense of familiarity and calm despite their situation. The next day, Arthur explains that while he was gathering food the day before, he also did some scouting around the island. From what he observed, they are the only people currently on the island. He also found the boats that Lucas and Elijah washed up on, but those boats are not in any condition that can help them escape. With all of this information, Arthur presents them with two possible options. The first option is to wait for rescue. He points out that Jasmine would definitely come looking for him sooner or later. The second option is to try to leave the island themselves. He explains that the mainland is not too far away, so reaching it on their own might be possible. However, Lucas suddenly interrupts and says that neither of those plans will work. He then takes out his scroll and shows them the target of his quest. It is a mana beast that has the ability to control weather, although only on a limited scale. Lucas explains that if they try to cross the sea while it is still alive, they will not survive. Based on all the information he has gathered, he believes the beast must be hiding somewhere on the island. He then swears that he will burn it to ashes and begins heading out immediately. Arthur stops him and suggests that they all go together instead, since working as a group will be more effective and safer than going alone. At the same time, Sylvie finally manages to find Jasmine. She tells Jasmine that Arthur is still alive. Jasmine feels relieved and happy to hear this, but she also realizes that she cannot waste any time and needs to move quickly to find him. Back with Arthur and the others, they are now hiding in front of the mana beast's location, carefully planning how to attack. Lucas makes the first move by launching a fireball into the cave. However, the attack backfires, sending chunks of rock flying out toward them. Elijah quickly reacts and saves Lucas by raising an earth wall to block the debris. Lucas starts to feel proud of himself, thinking that his fireball must have already defeated the beast. But at that moment, the cave begins to collapse, and the mana beast finally reveals itself in full. It immediately launches an energy ball at them, but Arthur blocks it with his sword. Lucas starts to panic and even becomes scared for a moment, but he quickly forces himself to stay calm because he does not want Arthur to see him acting that way. Arthur then moves forward and charges at the beast while Elijah supports him from behind. Arthur attacks with a flurry of sword strikes, but none of them seem to work. The beast's wounds begin to heal and regenerate right away. Arthur notices this and starts thinking quickly about a solution. He then tells Elijah and Lucas to switch positions with him. This surprises both of them. Elijah moves to the front line with Arthur, while Lucas is placed in a support role at a distance. Arthur lands a sword strike, and at the same time Elijah creates multiple earth spikes that shoot up and trap parts of the beast's body. They use the spikes to fill and lock its damaged areas. Arthur then realizes something important. When the beast is trapped like this, it cannot regenerate properly. They repeat the same strategy once more. Arthur attacks first, then Elijah uses earth spikes again to seal the damage. This combined attack is finally enough to bring the mana beast down completely. Arthur and Elijah celebrate with a quick high five, but Lucas claims that he was the one who did most of the work. However, the situation changes when it turns out that the mana beast is not actually dead. It suddenly starts moving again and wakes up. Arthur immediately charges toward it again, thinking about how much longer he will have to keep fighting because he is already reaching his limit. At that moment, Jasmine appears. She is running toward the island at high speed and spots Arthur in the distance. She increases her speed even more and dashes straight toward him. Just as Arthur is about to land another attack, Jasmine arrives and finishes the mana beast with a single powerful strike. After defeating it, she immediately runs to Arthur and asks if he is okay. Elijah and Lucas both stare at her in shock, completely stunned by how easily she was able to take down the mana beast in one hit. Later at sunset, Jasmine apologizes to Arthur for what happened and says she is sorry for letting things get so dangerous. Arthur tells her not to worry about it. He says he is just glad she came to save him in time. Meanwhile, Elijah and Lucas are chasing Sylvie because she is holding the mana core from the beast. They try to catch her, but they fail. Before they can grab her, Sylvie quickly eats the mana core instead. At the same time in Xyrus, Tesha meets up with her party. She tells them that she still has not met Arthur yet, and they both seem to keep missing each other at different times. Faye and Vaya start to suspect that Tesha is not just unlucky, but actually nervous about meeting Arthur. Tesha immediately gets defensive when they say this. She stands up and leaves without saying much more. However, it turns out Faye and Vaya were correct. Tesha really is nervous about meeting Arthur. After thinking about it, she gathers her courage and goes to stand outside Arthur's house. She hesitates at the door, trying to decide whether to go in or not. But just before she enters, she runs into Reynolds. Tesha gets extremely embarrassed and quickly runs away, leaving Reynolds confused and wondering what just happened. Meanwhile, a group of hooded men look over a magical map. They are searching carefully for a beast strong enough for the Day of Reckoning. That was episode 3. Subscribe to not miss the next part and watch the next video on screen.